Yeah, but they're
Yeah.
not. They suck though. I mean, come on.
Well,
they're
they smile.
Exactly. That's why you got to look for a good cat. A good
And-
cat is ideal, but hard to find.
Someone said
Axolotls
it
smile
best.
too, right?
Yes.
Zonia, please mute your StreamYard, then so you can only talk in the Discord. Yeah, someone said all cats are bastards, and I think I agree with it.
Oh no, Fanatiq! Listen, you're
Taking
one of
the
them. You
hardest
just need to be
stances.
converted. You just need to meet the
Holy
good
shit.
cats. I'll send you
With
one.
the controversy.
No, I do the converting.
I'm gonna de-radicalize you from a cat abolitionist.
It's gonna make you sell your cats.
That's what I would do. Once you get a dog and you're like, oh my goodness, animals can actually be affectionate and have personalities and love you and actually be worth something. They're not going to look at me like I'm their servant. Wow.
You see, this is what I'm talking about. A lot of cats, cats in general, not the best, but good cats. You just don't know. You haven't met the good ones. You'll see.
Yeah, at least the dog only eats you
I'll
after
send
you're
you some
dead.
videos.
Yeah.
Let me see. So we're waiting on Black American Made and PrimeCayes. We need you to join.
I'm here. I'm already in.
Oh, okay. Let me get you 1 second. Originally, I didn't see you.
I will say, to the dog side's credit, the best cats are the ones that are most like dogs. So that's, take that for what it's worth.
True. If only they had small cat-shaped dogs. Oh, wait.
Pons, do you not have a camera for StreamYard?
So it's like my OBS is like using the camera and it doesn't want to do both, and my Logitech capture is being shit right now. So,
Do you think you could?
I could definitely try, but
use
shut my
not use it on
stream.
OBS.
Yeah,
and then use it on there, and then capture it from OBS.
You could do
Oh my
that.
God.
You could
Those are
use the
big
OBS
brains. Yeah,
virtual
I'll do that.
camera too.
Right.
Strangely, it was like 10-15 minutes after being online on Streamlabs the first time I used it before it ever recognized my virtual cam. So do what you will with that.
For some reason, StreamYard is like taking a moment to like recognize my camera. Before it would just be instantly, but now it's doing that. It did that yesterday and like the day before, so I don't know what's going on.
Interesting.
But it might be my phone ass computer. I don't know. Whatever.
I think we just need a Black American Made. I literally invited him like 3 minutes ago. So he might take a couple minutes. So I think with this conversation, I didn't put in a lot of work. I didn't like really map out the conversation or any of those things. I just did the Fanatiq thing, just kind of lazied it up and was hoping you guys can carry me.
We don't expect anything from black people, really, so don't worry about it. All right.
I'm starting off hot.
I mean, I'm pretty sure you expect length and girth, but that's a whole other conversation. So who said what? What did you hear? Because I didn't know. Come on, man. Come on. That's not my fault. I didn't say that. Come on.
I think the panel should be about this, actually.
Actually, no.
I'm okay with the topic change. I'm fine with getting canceled over this one.
Yeah, that's what the L and the G stand for. And LGBTQ.
Now, listen, with Fanatiq here, it'll be a nice civil discussion, right? That's what this panel's all about. We can make it work.
We could, but we're not. I don't think I would even. I can't even. What is there to talk about? That sounds like not a. It sounds like just a bunch of people being uncomfortable and awkward.
Yeah,
just a test of your moderation.
Of the universe, really. Just like gravity exists. All right, what else is new?
Not gonna lie, I feel a little attacked right now, but I'm not sure why. Can't quite point it out.
Oh, let me see. Pons, you're missing. It
know,
says your device is not connected.
I'm going as hard as I can right now. Okay, believe it or not, I've been on the internet for more than 2 years. I swear to God.
All right, I'm telling you, the easiest thing is like switch to your OBS scene to something that's not StreamYard, and then switch your OBS scene to something that's not that's like blank or doesn't have your camera active. Then go refresh StreamYard, reconnect to it, and then you can capture the window from StreamYard.
That's assuming he doesn't have for his window capture, he has it so that the camera turns off,
Oh yeah, there's a setting that you have to do to turn off your camera
Yeah,
when
you
it's
need-
not being used.
Disable this device when not being used.
Oh,
I don't remember how
okay.
to
Yeah,
do
I know
that.
exactly what you're.
It's in the
No, I know exactly where it
properties.
is. I got you. Sorry, I'm taking up so much time with this.
No, don't worry.
It's okay. It's okay.
cool.
We're still waiting on a nigga.
We all been through it at some point in time, right?
True.
Well, like I've got a double dose of Zonia, so like I'm chilling, right? Everything.
Oh, were they there on Tuesday on
Yeah.
Amazon Lily?
Yeah.
Dang. I didn't check it out, but
I heard.
I'm
I missed
excited
the
that it's
good part.
back.
It got spicy.
Oh
Yeah.
man, I heard the first half was crazy. Oh, I got linked. I haven't got a chance to watch yet.
You want to give me a baby recap?
We were it got spicy like randomly. Like so Erudite and I were having a disagreement on like the best way to like help mothers, right? It was a simple disagreement, you know, like a leftist disagreement, you know? But
Right.
Mhm.
talking about like whether we should have a like a stipend for parents, right? So just for being a parent, nothing else, right? No income test or anything. If you're a parent, the government gives you a stipend, help you raise your kid, right? Supporting families.
Sure.
She was talking. I was talking about doing it as a direct payment. Myself and Sonia actually, and then Erudite was saying it should be a tax break, and we were having this conversation. Someone else jumped into Lily late, and it got a little heated. People thought they were being personally attacked, and that things escalated from there. And then the next subject we were talking about like sex positivity, and like what does that actually look like? I think you would be interested in that conversation, whether sex positivity is like an unqualified good, or something that we should rethink. Has it gone too far, sex positivity?
Okay, that sounds. I'm gonna definitely check that out. I mean, you already know I'm conservative, so I'm probably gonna disagree with y'all niggas on that one, but still should be an interesting conversation.
There was, I think you might be, you might feel more represented on that panel than usual. I would say, at least directionally. I think there was a fair bit of like voice to like both conservative and liberal concerns.
Amazing. I mean, you know, that's
at least
PrimeCayes.
reasonable ones. The reasonable ones.
He normally picks, you know, good panels like that. Makes sense.
I got Fanatiq on usually, so yeah.
Thank you.
But then there's also Bam. I mean, he gets on there a lot too. I don't know why he like gets through the cracks.
Yo, listen, Bam is by far one of the most clutch panelists I think that exists in Twitter space. He's just hit.
It's like Bam just walks through the door and I suck a bunch of him. Like, it just literally gets in here.
Instant.
All
right.
Sorry, he's waiting.
So listen, you guys. Thank you guys so much. Is everyone here? Everyone ready? We're good?
Yeah, I'm good to go.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for being a part of today's Fanatiq panel. I didn't do all of the work that I typically do in trying to make sure the conversation is like really sculpted and all of those things. And so today we're about to see if my panelists can carry this one for me. So the topic of discussion is basically about LGBTQ in media representation. And I think what inspired me to have this conversation was specifically, or to moderate this conversation, whatever, host this conversation, is specifically because, with Disney recently kind of making the statement about increasing production of LGBTQ characters and people having a lot of backlash against Disney over the Don't Say Gay bill. And, I guess just kind of it just seems like there is a topic that's needed to be had about representation within LGBT media. Within the media, and specifically, we've recognized the benefits of positive representation from, with African American people, even though we've obviously been poorly represented and underrepresented. We've seen the benefits of increasing that. And so I think the idea that LGBT representation would mean something, I don't know. I feel like there's some conservative people who are on one side and so on and so forth. I just think it should be a good conversation, and we're hoping that these people can make it happen. So I got 7 guests. Didn't really tell them what the 6 guests. Didn't tell them what the conversation was going to be about. I just invited Bam less than 15 minutes ago. He had no idea what this conversation was going to be, and we're going to see if Twitch people. Yep, I said it. You people. We're going to see if you people can hold a conversation like we're sitting around a dinner table. You know, it's Thanksgiving. Everyone's eating. We're just having a good old time. We finished our food, and while we're just sitting around in the living room, and it's just you and a group of people, and we're just having a conversation, it just pops up. We're talking about LGBTQ representation in media and Disney. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and I'll just start it off by saying this. There was a talk about 50% representation. And I don't know if people read that properly or not, but I think the idea of having a 50% representation of your characters being LGBTQ sounds absolutely absurd. It sounds like a hyper over-representation. And for a medium that's kind of aimed at children, it seems like that's a bit much to me. I can understand why parents would be a little bit critical of something like that. And I don't think that requires you to be transphobic or any other alphabet phobia. That's my opening. Anyone care to respond? And you guys take it from there.
I'm already here, right? Don't worry. We can, as a Twitch person who regularly is unprepared for anything, right? I'm used to swimming in these waters, all right? It's not a problem. Like, are you tilting at windmills? Like, does Disney have 50% representation of LGBTQ individuals in its properties that's been putting out recently?
Oh, I'm not going to answer that question.
It hasn't. I'll answer myself. It hasn't. Like, that's like not a thing, right? So I get it, right? So taking it to race for a second, because, you know, I'm even more comfortable there. I think there is something fair to say, right? Like, it would be weird if like half of all shows like had like a black character, right? Like, because we're not like half of the population, right? Like, we're a small bit of the population. I think we definitely, I don't think it has to match exactly, right? You don't have to like get the demographics exactly right from representation. I think you just have to have a willingness to tell these stories, right? To a willingness to put these characters in without having to put together a fucking committee about this, and you know, and do it well, like you were saying before, right? Like we have representation now. It's not always positive representation, not always really good representation, right? But that's okay if you have like a large section to choose from. If you have a lot of images of yourself to choose from, then it's okay if some of them are not so great. But if, like, from our LGBTQ friends, if you have just a tiny bit, right, well, then you're struggling. You are very concerned about each individual one that you have, because that's what the world's going to see, right? This one representation of a trans individual struggling with their identity, right? That's what the world is going to look at, because so many people don't know trans people. So if Disney is trying to trying to put out a lot of positive characters along these lines, I think it's a good thing.
We'll also say, I'd like to add that I think that you guys have reasonably pointed out how, like, it's not necessarily a transphobic for a parent to have concerns of these things. I think that sometimes those narratives go a little too far and kind of even radicalize people as a form of pushback against those narratives. But I do think that, like, it's worth noting, I think, that it's not necessarily just accurate representation or like realistic levels of representation, right, that are the point. Because at a certain point, even if you're seeing, like, let's say, I don't know, 20% or 30% or 15% or whatever you'd like to choose, I think that there's value to a destigmatizing value there, right? And I think that insofar as that's the case, the trans community is probably people who are like really stand to benefit from a sense of destigmatization in our society. And insofar as that's the case, I see an advantage there to a certain extent, even if it pushes past like a sort of accurate to reality degree of representation. And it's hard for me. There's very little like potential downsides, I guess I would see to like an overrepresentation in the media of these types of things. But I do see a lot of potential benefits in terms of how the trans community react and so our social narratives around these things and destigmatization. You know what I mean?
Oh, I thought Doobie's hand was raised like he wanted to go. Yeah. You can then.
I can go? Okay.
Yeah.
So Prime, yeah, I think have you seen the new like live action Cinderella that Disney put out?
No, but I recall it. Yeah.
I've seen it twice, right? And that I think that'd be an example of it's just like a musical, and you know how I like musicals. But that'd be an example of a recent Disney property where they've sucked out all the whiteness and replaced it with LGBTQIA and minority stuff, right? Like Cinderella's a Hispanic woman. The fairy godmother is now an extremely flamboyant gay guy, right? A black gay guy. Most of these characters in the original story, it's like a white European kingdom or whatever. No, they're all like racially mixed and gay and whatever the fuck, right? And you can say that's a good thing. I don't give a fuck. I'm a grown ass adult. I don't care about what these characters look like in this film. And actually, I thought the new fairy godmother is really funny. But
when did that movie come out?
I think it was like last year.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we were talking about Brandy
Rachel
Cinderella.
Zellweger.
Oh, different Cinderella.
Not Zellweger. The new Hispanic girl who did the
She does a song. What's that? It's like I love you. I love when you call me Senorita. That singer. I forget her name.
Yeah.
She's a very famous singer. Yeah, she was in it, and she was great, by the way. But it was very the agenda, quote unquote, was very on the nose. It's super obvious what the purpose was here, right? And I think we can. I mean, do any of you guys disagree that there is an agenda, that it exists, and that the agenda is to normalize LGBTQIA whatever lifestyles and gender expression like that? You guys all agree that exists, right?
So I would actually say, loosely speaking, yes, but I would clarify just a little bit, which is that I think there's two agendas at play. And sometimes they get conflated, but they're not necessarily the same. And that's people trying to normalize a certain behavior versus people trying to destigmatize behavior, or like maybe encourage a behavior versus trying to destigmatize behavior. And I think that when you make this, like, I think that you've basically pointed at what is a worthy contention of, like, at least in my mind, the worthy contention that you've hinted at here is that, like, what about the pushback? What about the pushback that we invoke? Because honestly, I don't really care much about an obvious agenda. I don't think it's much of a problem in of itself. I think where it becomes a problem is if it ends up hurting itself. Because, like, I think we can all agree, right, that we've seen like all black casts in movies where it was great and it didn't feel like an agenda, right? It felt like a good narrative, and none of us thought. I would think that we all thought, like, we've probably had times where we're on both sides of this fence in terms of a viewer, right? Where we're like, this feels like an agenda of some sort. This feels like this was pushed just for the sake of the agenda. And there were times where it felt like they achieved representation in a way that was good faith and like genuine, right? And I think that is something worth thinking about. Like, to what degree are we like harming these good faith advocacy groups and the way we advocate for good faith causes and representation by like when we get into these weird things where we're forcing it down people's throats.
Can we define the agenda, though? Can we define that? Because the way people are using it in slightly different ways here, right? And so, like, from what I think, how people are using it is that this is when we are doing diversity and inclusion badly, right? Like, if you think that there are movies where like they switch to races, right, and it just like feels natural, like the one with Michael Jackson, the Oz, you know, the one, right? I forget the name of that, right?
The Wiz.
Excuse me, thank you, The Wiz. Like, that worked, right? That was a beautiful movie, popular movie, right? But then there's also examples like Professor Meat was pointing out that just seem like they're trying to get across some sort of message, right? And it's an intangible thing, but it seems just less genuine. And I think that's when people are talking about the agenda. At least the people here. Other people are saying that, like, any LGBT inclusion is an agenda, part of the liberal agenda, the gay agenda, whatever, right? And they just don't like it at all.
Yeah,
like
I
think
I
there's
see
like a
sort of a there's obviously there are elements that are very try-hard, and I would say that those become sort of an agenda, and those are pretty obvious when we see them. Like, a really good example of that isn't even related to LGBT, but like remember the cringe Pepsi commercial with the Jenner person, you know, handing the Pepsi to the cops. It's like very, very try-hard kind of stuff, and everybody cringes kind of globally around it because it's so obvious, and it's like, okay, there's an agenda right there, and it feels very tone deaf and artificial, and just, you know, like somebody really truly had to script this with all the intentions of trying to push all these buttons and check all these boxes, right? So that's where you get into agenda type stuff. But I think that overall, doing something that is more like having the right kind of representation in your company that's making products allows you to have a better representation of those people in the products that they create, right? So if you have a diverse staff in your, you know, that you work with, you're probably going to come up with more diverse, like for instance Disney, more diverse movies. And so for the longest time they kind of suffered from having a very stale, you know, like traditionally white catalog of movies and cartoons and such. And as they started diversifying their, you know, their artists and their directors and writers and stuff like that, and they started having people who were like, hey, I really like this story from my childhood in Louisiana, why don't we turn it into a movie, you know, and stuff like that. And it introduces the culture of the people from, you know, from the company, and introduces their backgrounds into the products that they put out into the world. And that's very natural representation of diversity, and that can be the same for LGBTQIA plus people.
Yeah, so I think we got to be honest. I'm not to imply that you're being dishonest, but I think we got to be like clear about what's actually happening. It's not just representation; it's over-representation, specifically of LGBT. Like,
is that
groups.
even true?
Yeah,
I think that
actually,
they're
yes.
talking about over-representation. I think we can look to a few niche examples. Definitely the movie you talked about sounds like it's there. But I think the important thing to remember is that companies don't usually say what their goals are. They usually say what's going to get them more money. And a company
but Disney has said
knows
where the
that-
goals are.
Well,
And
I understand that, but I think it's kind of silly to assume Disney's actually trying to go for 50% representation. To me, that seems like a pretty clear virtue signaling bullshit kind of.
Well, we just need to
I can clear this up actually.
Wait, hold on. We just need to look at what the films they've made recently, right? The Cinderella thing. Right. They have the Little Mermaid coming out, where where the Little Mermaid is not going to be black, right? So like they're actively pushing this agenda, and I'm going to call it an agenda because, and when I say agenda, I think there's like a negative connotation, right? But what I just mean is that there's a goal in mind.
They have intentions
toward that goal. Yeah, they're intending to normalize, to make something that's viewed as like taboo or something that's like not normal. They're attempting to normalize that and make it like something like an everyday occurrence, right? Like
give me 1 second. I just want to jump in. I think that's a perfect definition to go with, specifically because someone was asking earlier for that, and I think that is what the gay agenda or the LGBTQ agenda has always been, even when it came from conservatives, specifically the intention of normalizing or destigmatizing like LGBTQ lifestyles and so on and so forth.
Right.
So that's probably the agenda that we can be focusing on. Professor Meat, I know that you were going to say you had this. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, well, there was a couple things, but to touch on that in particular, destigmatization is the big thing for me. Like normalization, I feel like a lot of people get upset with that, even though maybe they shouldn't. But I was going to say, oh man, that's
you were going to clear up the 50% thing.
The 50%. Thank you. Yeah. So I was just looking at an article. That this is the statement it was based upon. A Disney exec said in a meeting that they were intending to make about 50% of the representation come from underrepresented groups, I believe it was, right? So that includes like minorities of all kinds, right? Yes, that's a clear virtue signal, but it helps keep it in perspective because it's not necessarily this massive, hugely disproportionate thing, and it's an agenda that I don't see a problem with, right? We can start to do a cost-benefit analysis based upon an agenda like that.
Exactly, right? But then at that point, it's like, and I agree with you, we should do the cost-benefit analysis. At that point, it feels like the conversation we're having right now is like, where is media in general going? Let's look at Disney an example and see how they're kind of slowly becoming more and more, woke in these regards. I think that's an entirely different conversation from like, is it okay for them to have an agenda like that, even if it's incredibly virtue signaling?
Right. I think it's interesting.
I think it's weird to call it virtue signaling. I think it's reasonable to expect that they actually do hold these virtues and these ideas, and
I think there's
there's an active like attempt to shape the culture, as our current culture 10 years ago was shaped by these same companies putting out kids movies and like adult entertainment.
Right? Yeah, so when we talk about people that go into these fields, go into movies, go into art, like these aren't like hardcore right wing conservatives. Like these people probably, at least like of the generation that's in it, they probably do have some like pro LGBT sentiments that they've gained over time, and they think it would be really cool to be part of the projects that they're doing.
Right, which I mean, that's what a virtue signal is, right? It's about, I feel like it's going to be good for society. I feel like it's going to make people look at us in a better light. I feel like it's going to make people respect us more. I think we can, maybe I'm wrong here. What do you guys think? If Disney could wave a magic wand and make all of their movies exactly 50% underrepresented groups, do you think that that's what they would go for? Or do you think that this is more the realm of what they're going for?
I kind of feel
the
like
current leadership, I think they would.
Okay.
I do think it's fair.
The current leadership, are you sure about that?
Well,
like we could talk about Chapek, who's in charge of Disney, and he wanted to stay. He wanted to like move away Disney from like getting into these political fights in the first place. That's why he got in trouble for his letter to his employees. That's why literally Disney employees rebelled against him. Are you sure the current leadership would actually want that?
By leadership, I thought he was talking about creators, like creative leadership.
But this is a single person, and when he said this, you just said there was like a revolt of Disney employees and other people in leadership because other executives in the company had publicly expressed and privately expressed that they want 50% representation of like minority groups, like racial and LGBT.
That's not what they said. They didn't say 50%. They just said like they were unhappy with his response to the "Don't Say Gay" bill. That's what happened, right? So they
said 50% directly.
Disney did say 50%.
Okay, so here's something to keep in mind about companies. Companies will often set a target of something high, especially when it comes to public, like PR type stuff, and they'll set like a high target because they know realistically they're never actually going to hit that target. So a lot of it has to do with, let's set our standards high, and we're going to get as close as we can to that. But they understand that they're probably never actually going to reach that point. So that's something that a lot of corporations do, and it's usually related to PR type things.
I'm sure this includes women, though. Like, I'm sure that's part of that underrepresented group.
Yeah, and we can think of times in the past where businesses have said things like, we're going to make sure that there's one woman on every council no matter what, or we're going to make sure that 50% of the people who are in our groups are women. And at the same time, similar things were said. I think that it was similarly virtue signaling of companies at the time. Maybe virtue signal is the wrong word for it, but it seems like companies are saying, this is what people want, this is what we're pushing towards. I don't think they actually have an intention of getting there. I think they have the intention of convincing you that they're going to get there sealed by their shit.
I don't know. I believe that Disney.
Someone sent me the letter where they said 50% or an article.
Could you put it in the Discord? I'd love to read it.
Yeah, that'd be great to see that.
Because I think that I'm pretty sure. I don't even think it's like some impossible task again. Like, and this is just my assumption, but I assume in that category of underrepresented groups that includes women. And I think there probably have been plenty of Disney movies already that have had 50% of their cast being women. Just because there's. If I had to guess the target audience, yes, it's all children, but probably little girls like have slightly over 50% of the representation. Just because one, there's more women in the world in general, and two, because they seem to have longer staying power with the movies. Like I know girls who are 28 who still love Disney movies, and I like Disney movies too, but it's different for some guys. Like some guys don't really do that.
Go ahead.
Oh, and I think on my position, somewhere in this conversation, I think the interesting part would be wondering, is any type of agenda? Do we consider this to be a good thing, neutral thing, bad thing? And where people stand on that? Just throwing my position out there first. I think representation is generally good for any community, and with LGBT people, it's probably necessary for the destigmatization part to be overrepresented. Just because if you actually look at the percentage of openly LGBT people in the population, it's like that would be 1 out of 5 out, on the best case scenario, 5 out of every 100 shows would have one LGBT person, which is probably not good enough to actually destigmatize. So they're like overrepresentation there is probably a good thing. I don't think you can have destigmatization, and this is something I can't necessarily prove. I believe that I don't think you can have destigmatization without some level of normalization, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I I do believe that as LGBT representation, like the more children are, because I don't believe people are born gay the same way I don't believe people are born straight. Like I believe that there is some like social aspect mapping onto it. And again, this is something I can't prove. I think that as children are more exposed to like LGBT content, there probably is going to be a growth, like generation over generation, of people who are LGBT, like who do come out as LGBT. And I don't believe, and I say this because I don't believe 100 years ago that there was the exact same percentage of the population that deep down was trans but just never came out. Like I believe there is some social factor of trans being a thing, and that knowing that that's an option that leads people to making that option. But again, y'all can push back.
I'm looking at this.
A lot I would like to push back.
I'm looking at this. The standards, right? The inclusion standards. And if this is what people are worried about, I mean, oh my God, get the fuck over yourselves, right? So like it says, right? There's so if you are not looking at this, it's in the Twitch chat here, and maybe in at least my Twitch chat, and maybe in some other places. There's multiple standards, right, to fill in, right? That their target goals they want to set. So standard A, right? And to complete standard A, you have to do 3 of the following 5 options, right? And one of those options is characters 50% or more of regular and recurring written characters come from underrepresented groups. So it doesn't say gay individuals or trans individuals or anything like that, just underrepresented groups. So 50%, like that could be it could be within a show of all black characters, 50% all black, and then the rest not, right? It could be 50% gay, but unless it's about like specifically a gay thing, it's probably not going to happen. Like a gay like focused top or premise, right? So this is nothing to be worried about, right? Like I don't know like why this would like upset you. Then there's like other options, right? So to get to standard, they don't even have to do that in terms of having 50% or more regular recurring written characters come from underrepresented group, right? So there's other options there too. So people are getting.
I think what people are worried about. I think what people are worried about is what Ben was kind of pointing to, right? Because the idea that gender identity and sexuality are influenced by the things that we're exposed to as children. Right, so if you have children being exposed to, in that Cinderella movie I mentioned, a very flamboyant gay man in a dress, right, flitting around as a fairy godmother, there might be some percentage of those children who will see that and want to dress like him, right? And maybe you think that's okay, right? But maybe some of those children end up trans, right? And I love my trans friends, but there are a lot of issues that come with being trans, and I don't think it's if you can have a kid be trans or not being a trans, I'd prefer they're not trans for their own like health. Right?
So like it's okay, Doobie. I'm not contagious anymore.
I love you, Zona.
Have you seen Shrek? Like, there's an entire character in that movie that's like a cross-dressing wolf.
Yeah, I understand. Well, that's part of the agenda. Okay,
it's important to understand the difference between gender dysphoric and transgender, because if we understand that, and we understand the fact that the reasons why most people that are most people that are transgender are also gender dysphoric, there's a very strong correlation there. Last I looked at it. Like, there's a whole bunch to the degree to which people might be becoming more transgender that weren't necessarily gender dysphoric before, which we are not creating gender dysphoric people.
But how do you know that?
Because that is like that. I guess I technically only know that insofar as we can generally be confident about things like we're not creating gay people, which the science seems to pretty strongly suggest we're not creating gay people.
Wait, but we don't know that either, though.
So here's the
thing. Wait, hold on.
Let me ask. Wait.
Not by normalizing it.
If I can, really quick, I just want to make sure. So that does sound like that's the bombshell. I was hoping that people would kind of jump on that. What Bam introduced. Do you guys think that is there any reality to the notion that LGBTQ can be socially developed? Like I think there's a phrase for it, which I think is like it's like ROGD, which is like rapid onset gender dysphoria. I think they prefer to. Is that actually a thing?
I'm going to do the deflation thing where we suck the life out of this conversation. This is literally the absolute bleeding edge of science right now. We can make claims one way or another, and most of the studies, if we want to look at the bleeding edge of science, are pointing towards the fact that you can be born with a gendered brain. So if we want to go there, we can. But I think it's pretty well. That's just what the science is.
It depends on what you mean by gender.
But that is one. Okay, so it's true. We are the bleeding edge, but the bleeding edge says that sexuality and gender expression are a product of like a mix of hormones, environment, developmental influences, etc. Right.
Right.
So
but
it doesn't.
We're not far enough to say what causes
a man
it.
brain.
There's no.
Wait. Don't both talk at once. Let them finish and then please respond.
Because I think we all understand here. I think most of us would agree that our understanding of gender expression generally, right, what a man is, it comes from the society that we were brought up in, right? So mine is going to be totally different from like a man that grows up in like a matriarchal culture, right? What his understanding of what a man's role is and what a man is, right? So given that we all accept that, I don't know why we would just dismiss the idea and the concern that if you expose children to LGBT whatever lifestyles, gender expression, this sort of thing, it could influence them into taking on some of these gender identities. And some people might think this is a negative thing.
Well, let me respond real quick. Just what you're saying is a very, to me, it feels like a very empty statement. You're saying, well, hold on, why aren't we looking at these absolute bleeding edge studies and making inferences yet? There aren't studies yet on like 40-year impacts of looking at blue screens all day either. But I wouldn't be comfortable making a decision based on what that's doing to people because the science is just not there yet. If you want to look at like individual niche studies, then to me that just seems like fairly nitpicky, right? Because for every study that you can find that says, well, actually, it's all social, there's some social, or for every study that you can find, I can find one that says the other. We just don't have a generally agreed on scientific basis right now. So to me, it feels like it all feels over. Well, no, because we're not scientists, right? So right now we're just talking about fields.
Why would we talk about something that was settled? Like if something was settled, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would like bleeding edge things.
Well, hold on, because there's two conversations.
Can I just point out the fact that like, so for example, if we're talking about trans people in particular, then there's like already a link between people that report like most people who report gender dysphoria reported it at like really, really, really young ages. So like when we start to like, I think the extent when we start to think about the extent to which our society might be normalizing things and increasing people that are trans or gender dysphoric doesn't really seem likely to be the case based on best evidence. And if we're talking about transgender, here's the thing: the degree to which people, because of all the disincentives that exist in our society for becoming transgender, the only extent, without necessarily being gender dysphoric, right? The only extent to which people would be incentivized to be transgender without necessarily being gender dysphoric is if it's been destigmatized. And there's no downside to it being destigmatized, unless, because in my opinion at least, and to be honest, gender expression and like the psychological effects of being able to express as the gender that you want are pretty well documented. And if parents have some type of like, just like if parents think that there's some, to a certain extent, of course, I respect parents' wishes, but also like to a certain extent, gender expression is a reality. We all live in it. And in the same way that I wouldn't let a parent deny their kids being like made to a certain extent, I wouldn't want to deny a kid being made aware of like, I don't know, anti-flat earth narratives, or the fact
we're all talking around each other.
I don't
think you have to understand the facts are what is going to determine your opinion here. A conservative sees something like, it's possible that someone who was previously not transgender, previously not having these issues, could go through some sort of social stimulation and now they are having those issues. If you actually believe that that's a thing, you don't think there's any underlying thing there, then it would be pretty right of you to assume that you don't want people to go towards that, because transgender people tend to live pretty sad lives, unfortunately, on average right now. So what I would say is, yeah, the facts actually do really matter here. That's the disagreement we're having. Professor Meek keeps saying, well, hold on, there is a biological aspect, but conservatives just don't agree with that.
So I can simplify this for everybody. If it wasn't a difficult life for a trans person, right, would you care that your kid ended up being trans, even if it was influenced by the culture that they grow up in or media or whatever?
Yeah, I personally,
I think people would. Then again,
I would.
I've like.
So why, if they don't have a difficult life, then what is the thing that you're concerned about?
Yeah. So when you say difficult life,
let Bam finish his response first, and then you follow.
Yeah, I think that again, like it sounds like to me, this is the conversation to have, and we're not gonna. I don't think the thing is to come out of this conversation with some super hard solution, like, okay, we settled it. It's just like, where do we think things are? I think that parents legitimately. I know everyone's like, parents don't own their kids. Like, I get that, and I for the most part agree. But there is a reality that, like, you came from me. Like, you are a product of me, and I want to instill some level of, like, passing on what I consider to be good to the world. So if I had a child was born and they were named Tommy, like, I wouldn't want them to, I would want them to live as Tommy. I would want them to live as the man that I attempted to raise them to be, or the daughter that I would raise them to be. Again, I'm not even a conservative, so this isn't me like having some big pushback. Like, I legitimately, I don't know if it's good or bad.
No,
but I'm saying,
to hear.
Question. If they said that they changed to Muslim, like, would that be like a similar level of bothering to you? Because you
for
feel
me,
like
that for me that would be way worse, and not even bad, because I think Muslims are bad people, but just because I'm Christian, so I think my religion is super important to me. So my child was like rejected what I consider to be God, my version of God. That would be way bad for me. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't love them.
Because the thing I kind of want to get to.
Well, so can I ask you a question earlier?
Yeah.
I think my answer is like totally different from Ben's. So my when you say easy life, right? If they could have an easy life, if they could just like flip a switch somewhere, and suddenly they're passing, and they don't need to take hormones their whole life, they don't need to go through surgery, and they don't need to worry about anybody fucking with them, then I wouldn't care, right? But I think that, given that for a lot of people, being trans means you're taking hormones. You need to keep up with that. Some people like to go through like surgery because even with the hormones, they're so uncomfortable with certain things. Like, I wouldn't want my kid to go through that, right? If I could help it. Right? So it's not, if it were as simple as like flipping a switch and suddenly they look like the gender they want to look like, then I wouldn't give a fuck. But I think, unfortunately, there's a lot more to it than that, I think.
I mean, that's fair.
Talking about people that feel that way, it sounds like you're describing like gender dysphoric people, and the thing is like, the best evidence indicates that that's sort of something that's starting to happen in people in their development, like before we've even had much of a chance to like socialize them.
I don't think that's true.
Or I could say, what about gay or lesbian? What about
most
that?
People,
So hold on, Prime wanted to get in, and then Zonia. Prime, you don't ask, just get in when you fit in, but just try to be.
Sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, all right. So I also would care if my child was trans, even if we got rid of all the stigma, right? And specifically because I've heard like the experience of parents of trans children, and like it makes intuitive sense to me that when you give birth to a child, right, you have all these like hopes and dreams for them, right? And when they and part of that is like, involves their gender, right? Like, oh, like my son is going to like do these things that are typical of this gender. And when they come out as trans and start transitioning, like, it's a death, right? You have to like put all that to rest, that they're not going to be this thing, right? They'll be walking down the aisle in a dress rather than a suit, and like that's pretty traumatic for people.
I think a cis person could still be wearing a dress, like a cis man could still be wearing a dress.
Fair enough. But like, yeah, it's just it's tough, right? Like, yeah, that's it. I'll just leave it there.
Like, because I was kind of getting to like what the water level basically for our society is, cis hetero, right? So that's sort of like what is understood to be the standard, the norm, and that's what everybody's exposed to. So the idea of kind of having the quote agenda to create a normalization of being gay or lesbian or trans, etc., is to basically say, look, these are things that are reality, and you don't get to see them in our common media so much because, the norm is the cis hetero kind of, the way that most people develop. And so a lot of people who may be struggling with these ideas and not understanding them and being confused about them, if they're not exposed to these possible, ways that they may end up developing, it can be very difficult to develop in that world, like it was for me. I grew up in the 80s, right? We'd never heard about trans people. I didn't really figure it out until 1998. So by then I was already 20 years old, and so I didn't have any exposure to it. And you look at it in this way of like, if I had understood a lot of things, like if I knew that this was even a thing, so many things would have made so much more sense. A lot of the difficulty I had in life wouldn't be an issue. But all I get to see is all these cis hetero relationships all around me, everywhere in the media, in books, and everything that I'm exposed to. So, and that is the norm. So the idea is to sort of normalize these things and basically say that no, these are not wrong, these are not bad, these are okay, these can happen, these can be a thing, and some people are like this, and there's nothing wrong with that. And so if we can get that, the big hill for so many people to get over, like I would posit to you, Doobie, is like, let's even take away the trans part, because that does add other layers, especially if you're dysphoric and you're going to go through like gender affirming surgery and such. But say if you're just gay, and like if you got rid of all the stigma around being gay, there's no hill anymore, there's none of that difficulty. They may as well just be straight, right? So that's the idea of the quote normalization or destigmatization. And why would that ever be an issue to push, even as an agenda, if it makes the lives of those people easier, so you don't even have to worry about it for your own children?
Yeah, and I totally understand that, right? And this is why I'm not like totally opposed to there being representation, whatever. Like I think I've told you, like I have a trans sibling and I have a bisexual like sister, right? So like, and I want them. And I remember when that trans sibling initially came out, this lesbian to me when she was 18, she was in fucking tears, bawling her eyes out, because she was worried that I wasn't gonna like her anymore and that the family was gonna disown her and all this kind of shit, right? But I'd known since she was a kid. Everybody knew. We just didn't talk about it, right? Like nobody really cared. And I don't, and I can't even imagine what she was going through. Like the fucking stress of needing to get to tell me this thing about herself that she was terrified would make me hate her for some fucking reason, right? So I don't want people to have to go through that, right? That's awful. So I can totally understand that mindset, Sonia, right? You normalize these things, you make it not a big deal. So when people are this way, it's just it is what it is, and it's not something they even need to come out about. It's just who they are, right? Like I totally get that, right? But I don't think, given that we are on the bleeding edge of science here with some of this shit, I don't think that the concern that Bam pointed to that some parents have can just be like dismissed. Right? And I think that's where the core of the issue is that they're worried that, hey, if I sit my kid down in front of the TV at 3 years old, 4 years old, and suddenly a Disney movie comes on, and suddenly there's like a trans person, and there's like a super gay fairy godmother guy, and there's like a non-binary person. Maybe my kid starts being that way, and oh shit, that comes with a whole boatload of maybe it like induces gender dysphoria in some of this, because we don't even know where that comes from really, right? And a lot of people that get that, they develop it by 7 years old, right? So like I can totally understand parents being concerned about that and wanting to avoid that for their children.
I also think that there's like what we're having the conversation from is not a place of like not a place of people asking for people to reject who they are deep down. The reality, what we're saying is like, what if the alternative is people never go through that to begin with? Like something I'll make it personal. And actually I don't care how she feels. My girlfriend's gay. I say that all the time. I tell her to her face, I'm like, you gay, you like girls, like, and it's super cool. She's like, she's bi, but she says she's not really bi, but she's bi. And she, like I said, she's done things with girls that's completely fine. It's all cool, all free love, whatever. But she's not there's not something that she was like unfulfilled in her life. Like there's not something that deep down in her cross she needed to do. We just live in a society that's so accepting that she's like, oh, okay, why not? I could do this. But if this was like 1960, I'm sure like me and her, like things like that never would have crossed her mind. And she could live a happy, fulfilling life without ever having these thoughts to begin with. That's what I'm saying. I believe that there is some percentage of people who are going to be, and again, could be gay, just any form of LGBT, that in another world, like that exact same person in gay, like with different social experiences, comes out feeling completely different about themselves just because there's things they never considered, things they never, like rabbit holes they never went down. And I don't know if this is, again, some conservatives would rather be in that world where like, oh, okay, my kid never even goes through that. They never even think about those things. But again, I don't necessarily have an opinion on whether it's good or bad for people to come to those conclusions, cross those hills, and figure out things about themselves. Because for example, even non-binary, I think non-binary people are super valid. I don't know if that's something you necessarily experience from birth. Like I don't know if that's a feeling that you can have.
I think
sure, but I would
Nate.
like to just push back. Yeah, I would just like to push to clarify something real quick. Like with like when it comes to like especially gay stuff and gender dysphoric stuff, people have been now with gay stuff with people that are homosexual in particular. There's people have been trying to prove for years that we're like making people gay, or the dangers of making people gay through and especially through media. Like we look at the effects of the representation. Like people are all the time studying the effects of representation in media, and there's just no evidence at all that like representation in media of homosexuality leads to like more. There is evidence that it leads to more people reporting as homosexual, but that's what we would expect to see if there was a destigmatization, right? So there's really no evidence at all that there's an increase in homosexuality as a result of representation in media. Now, as for gender dysphoria, these things are less studied. That's fair to say. A lot of this, almost everything around gender is cutting edge science, right? But there are some things we know pretty well, and that's that there's like a bunch of like physiological markers for transgenderism, for gender dysphoria, that are actually really unique, that a lot of people don't talk about. But when you start to learn about them, you can start to build this picture of like, okay, there's something like fundamental that's going on here with trans people that is not just going to be like taught into them when we're talking about people who have gender dysphoria. I can list some of those if you'd like.
I have to jump in here. So, I feel like we're really, this is again the exact same thing we were doing 15 minutes ago. You have the lefty side of things, which is saying, look, here's all the science that's showing that it does. Here's what I think it does. We just can't deny these things. If you're denying these things, you're saying this. We've already, as I said earlier, conservatives don't see that as a valuable argument. Conversely,
I just don't want to make it into like conservatives versus liberals argument. I think
unfortunately, some things do fall down those lines, and this is one of those things, because you have to understand, to the conservatives right now, well, I don't mean to call you a conservative generalized, to the people who are right-leaning right now, you have to understand that when we hear you say something like, there's a chance that they're going to suffer, it's going to increase their suffering in life, and I don't think they should go through that. I just hear my expectations weren't met. It sounds like you could just pick anything. Like, you wouldn't want your kid to become an artist, would you? Because artists live pretty fucking miserable lives as well. You wouldn't want your kid to be like smart or anything, right? Because people who are smart tend to do really, really bad in school and in college and tend to have really, really low wages, people who fall in the very top 10 percentiles. I don't think that it's a smart argument to say that, but I can understand your validity there. It's just, it's a wholly useless conversation because we're going off of a preset set of facts. You're going off of a different preset set of facts. And right now there is no mutually agreed on fact right now.
Wait, hold on.
Wait,
hold on. But really quickly, because I think even using the same facts, right? So something Meech just said, that we had more people reporting that they were gay, right? Which is what you'd expect when it's like normalized or destigmatized. But that's also what you'd expect if it were like influencing children into homosexuality.
Exactly.
Right? So like, and because we don't really know, actually we do know that sexuality, right? The development of sexuality is influenced by your environment, what you're exposed to.
We don't know how much.
Exactly. That's a problem. You don't know how much on the other side either.
Exactly. Right? So making an argument for either is wholly useless. Instead, what we should do is move past this and talk about, okay, we both agree that there's different set of facts on both sides. How can we still come to a meaningful conclusion outside of that? Because if we're going to just sit here and talk all day about studies, you can throw a billion studies at us, we'll throw a billion studies. It's never going to change anything.
Yeah, that's what I was just talking about the idea because
exactly. That's
because that's how that's the next step of it. We don't know whether Disney is doing this is good. If it is the case that this more largest bit of representation is leading people to coming to conclusions they otherwise wouldn't have came to and feeling beliefs that they otherwise wouldn't have, then that creates a different there's a different answer on how we feel about that. Like now we have to decide if it's good or bad.
30 years for the studies to come out.
Exactly.
So here's the thing. I've got an idea. I mean, like this is something we haven't really touched on, but if all the options were laid on the table, including cis hetero, gender normative options, let's call them options, like a grocery store, all the options were there and you're raised with all of those, wouldn't you inevitably lean toward the thing that you most identify with? Like, would it even matter at that point?
That's what I'm saying. I think that people that's exactly my position. I believe that given options, you're inevitably going to have people choosing different options. If you have less options, like you may have people that find their way to that option, like on their own, but like giving like natural options, this is something you can be. You're like, because I don't believe that humans just figure out who we are. I think that people. But
does it matter then? Like, if you've got all the options in front of you, wouldn't you inevitably be choosing the thing that you identify most with? And thus because you have all the options there, you could go cis hetero, you could go gay, you could go whatever trans. If those are all the options.
Conversation
or you could end up like really confused about your gender identity, like a lot of people do these days.
We can't take a hacksaw and open someone's brain and look into it. So right now these conversations are all about feelings. I feel like when a person transitions, this is what's going on. I feel like when a person decides that they want to start making this decision, I feel like when a person feels these things, this is all feelings. Instead, what we should talk about, we should just move past this.
Feelings.
Right, which is why I think that arguing the validity of those things are useless because it's all subjective. Well, right? Hold on. So you have a different feeling than me.
So the fact that it's valid, like you've pointed out validly, I think why, like, and to a certain extent, like we need to like push through to an extent, like with the truth. Like at a certain point, like this is about
not with
people's expectations. No, what I mean is like people's you've correctly pointed out that people's expectations are falling short, and that takes a back seat to like basically what is true or not, like what the reality that we live in, and like the benefits of these policies we're talking about. But that being said, I think the reason why it's worthwhile to give a little bit of extra credence to people who like to push back against these things, to parents who have pushed back against these things, it's not so much that you're trying to like, it's more about the narratives that we submit and the way we talk about them, because I think it's worthwhile to extend them a little charitability considering how confusing gender is. Like gender is a complicated thing, and a lot of people like the idea of what is transgender versus being gender dysphoric is a complicated thing that, like, honestly, most people I talk to do not have a very good understanding of. And this is coming from a cis white male,
Yeah,
so it's pretty disappointing. But the thing is, it's like, to a certain extent, if something is more difficult to understand, which it seems evidently to be the case, to a certain degree, we need to extend some charitability to parents, because there's probably a lot of parents out there who really aren't transphobic, but just have no idea what it even means to have a gendered experience, right?
Exactly, and that's all I'm saying, is that conservatives, they're not saying, well, they are saying that there's nothing inherently biological, but their value statement doesn't come from that. That's the underlying fact. Their value statement is, if it's not inherently biological, then who would ever want to put their kid through something like that? Which I think we could all agree, with the current understanding of how trans people's lives are lived, if we could choose for our kids to be trans or not, we wouldn't want them to go through that suffering. So I can understand where they're coming from with that. But from us on this side, it's just not perceived as a choice. So bringing this all back to Disney then, do we think that it's okay for Disney to take a stance on what they think the underlying facts are and then go beyond that and try to move to what they think is reasonable? Is it okay for a private business, to do that?
Yeah, well, I'd like to point out here, I think it's, especially if you're talking about a media company and private organizations and like the way we advocate for things, I definitely think we need to make it at least somewhat okay for people to have agendas in general. It shouldn't necessarily be a problem. But I would just like to point out, the way we're talking about Disney, 50%, like, when they're talking about misrepresented groups, unless we think that like media is just overall like underrepresented. Sorry, if we're talking about like, unless we think that like media is accurately representing like underrepresented groups already, then like they're just I just want to be clear that like the language 50%, I think Prime pointed this out earlier too. The fact that 50 or at the very least was hinting at it, right? Like the fact that 50% of misrepresented groups, that's vague. And that doesn't necessarily even sound overrepresentative. I mean, like,
it's an excellent point.
Have you guys live in America, right? Like there's that might be underrepresentative. They might need to go further, to be honest, depending on how they're parsing that out.
And I know that, like specifically with Disney, they're a major employer of the LGBTQ community overall. Like they're actually known to be one of the highest like percentiles of LGBTQ employees. And this is one of the things I always thought was really interesting about Disney. Like I go to Disneyland a few times a year, and there's a just very strong representation there. And what happened was when Disney didn't take a stance against the bill in Florida, the employee base staged a walkout and said that we want our company to represent us and stand up for us. And so that actually prompted action. And then the CEO of Disney got involved and did the whole thing where he said, I talked to Ron DeSantis and all this, right? So that's where some of this is coming from, is that they've got a massive employee base that's highly representative of the LGBTQ community. And that employee base staged a walkout to say, please do something about it. And now they're kind of overcompensating, right? And so what they're trying to do is with a lot of the stuff they've been doing with their movies over the last couple of years, this is particularly over the last like 3 years, has been to better represent their own employee base and their own company culture in their movies, because they hadn't been doing that for a while. Even 10 years ago, they had a very strongly LGBTQIA plus representative employee base. And that was one of the things that was talked about a lot, was that their movies don't reflect their actual internal company culture as much as it could, particularly with the LGBTQ community. And so they started changing that in the last several years, like the last 3 years or so. So that's where you're kind of seeing some of this come from, specifically with Disney. I don't know about other companies so much, but that explains a little bit of the background and what underneath how things are operating with Disney and why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Bam thinks that there's like an evil agenda at play. I don't think there's an evil agenda at play. I think that it's just we need to acknowledge that there is an agenda, and maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing, right? But I think we'd agree that they probably have good reasons for wanting to do that.
Right, but we can all agree that whether we disagree with it or not, whether we think it's too far or too much, it's okay for a company to say, I want there to be 50% representation.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, if the company said, I want there to be 5% representation, we'd all be talking about that too, right? Like it's at the end of the day, I think when a company makes a public statement, we can all agree that they're making a judgment there. There's going to be some gain off of making that statement versus just not saying anything at all, right? Because that's always the alternative as a company. You just say nothing, you continue to be Disney, you continue to make billions every day. But the reason they wanted to go beyond that was because they think that there's some value there, whether it be actual money or value for our society. It's okay for a company to do that. Ben Shapiro has a movie making thing, and he makes all sorts of movies about like tradcon women, like hunting down people who he disagree. That's okay. It's okay to have those.
He's got the school shooting one.
Yeah, he's got the school shooting movie. Like, so that's okay.
So it seems like I don't know if you guys, because it seemed like that conversation was being stifled a bit. Do you guys think that there is any social conditioning that can lead to any forms of LGBTQ? Like, in other words, do you think that environmental differences can lead to people being like, for instance, I don't know, social conditions can lead to people being like to higher homosexuality or higher transgenderism or anything? Do you guys think that any of that is possible?
I can. Oh, do you want to go first, Sonia?
Yeah. As the token trans on the panel, actually, I don't know what other people's gender identities are here.
You don't know,
but okay, so I am definitely of the belief, or at least leaning toward the belief, based on what things that I've observed, that it is a combination of nature and nurture, right? So there are elements that are innate to a person that can lead them in that direction, and then environmentally things can lead people in that direction. Because I've seen people go through changes in their own sexuality over time, and even going back to a prior sexual orientation after changing and such. And I've seen people kind of evolve fluidly with gender identity and such. So I think that there are elements of environment that can contribute to it, and I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. Something like dysphoria being environmentally influenced, I'm not really sure. I don't think that there's any evidence to say that that is the case right now. But again, this is such a newly studied thing that it would probably be another decade before we truly begin to get data that explains
Sure.
or
So
contributes to
dysphoria is
that.
something that's incredibly old. What about the other ones like homosexuality and things?
Yeah, I think there can be some environmental influence there just from what I have observed. And I know it's a little controversial to say that, but I think that overall you tend to have, there's something, um, you know, innate about your identity and your interests that is not easily explained just by environment. So there has to be, you know, there has to be more than just environment at play in that, right? So, and I would say that it's a combination of both from what I observe. And this is something that's also being talked about a bit and trying to be studied, but it's kind of controversial because it goes against the born gay, born lesbian, etc. kind of thing. But I think it is okay for us to crack that thing open and ask questions about it. And according to research, there are a lot of things pointing to, yes, environment can influence these things.
So I really want to jump on this because I think it's a really interesting question. One, I think it's plainly obvious, and I don't know one here would disagree with, that environment can decrease levels of homosexuality in terms of like how people like performing the act of being gay, right? Like we can stigmatize it, we can discourage it, and there are plenty of people out there, either today or in past generations, who felt like they were gay and just did not act on it for whatever reason. So we can do that. So in the opposite way, we can obviously encourage it, right? By us normalizing it and then allowing people to come out, right? And then at that point, if we got rid of all barriers, we'd be at base level, right? We know like the water level of like homosexuality, where that watermark is, and we don't actually really know where it is right now because of societal influence. But beyond that, I think it's actually more complicated than like gay, not gay. Right? People do gay acts, right? Like, you can physically kiss a guy, right? If you're a guy, you can physically kiss a guy and have no desire about it, right? Now that's a homosexual act that has been done, but there was no desire for it, right? Like maybe, for instance,
depends on the culture. In France, kissing a guy isn't a big deal.
No. I mean like a full-on makeout thing, right? This could be like in terms of like acting, right? Like, and you guys were acting, you did the kiss, right? Neither of you were turned on. So like, but what does that mean, right? I think that people engage in sex for all kinds of reasons, and desire is only one of those reasons, right? People engage in sex because it makes their partner happy, right? Outside of the gay dynamic, right? People engage in sex. I don't really feel like it, but like my partner wants to do it, so I'll do it, right? I don't have the desire to do it, but I'll do it. People can in prison, right? People engage in gay, exactly, and gay sex acts, and are they necessarily attracted to the other person? No, they're just doing the whole biological need thing, So can environment make it so? I think it's actually even more interesting in terms of when you're talking about women, how like there seems to be like higher levels of bisexuality in women. Is that like a brain thing for them? Like is it just something inherent to women, or is it the fact that society is more accepting of like women relationships? I don't know, right? There's so many levels to this. So I think it's a much deeper question than it sounds like. It's a lot.
Well, I was just asking a really simple question. I'm just asking the very simple question, and I get all the broader things about like some homosexual acts wouldn't necessarily make you gay because like there's like different circumstances. People in prison who might not identify as gay even though whatever, or people doing something for like a screenplay or for like actors or something playing a gay role, so on and so forth. That's not the question. The question is, can environment or social and can you socially influence people to be homosexual? Can that be social? Can homosexuality be socially or environmentally influenced?
I don't think that's even the question.
To some extent, environmentally.
No, that's my question.
Sure.
I'm asking that question. I'm asking that question
Sorry,
over and over again.
my apologies. What I mean is, I don't think that's a valuable question.
Well, it's valuable to me. I'm asking it. Can people answer it?
Yeah.
Sure. So, like, I think that there are very certain ways. Like, for example, like I've seen studies that show during like very particular, like there are very particular periods during people's breaching into sexual maturity where certain sexual experiences seem to be able to influence their sexuality, but there's no evidence to suggest that this is like the cause of homosexuality at large. And there's enough like indicators of homosexuality and correlates from younger ages that extrapolate to older ages that the best evidence, all best evidence points to the idea, and especially considering how people are constantly trying to prove as much of a link that they can, and they really struggle between like us causing homosexuality as opposed to being something innate. Best evidence points to it being mostly innate. There are ways in which our sexuality definitely can be environmentally influenced, but it's mostly an innate thing. And I do think it's important to be able to recognize both. But it is largely an innate thing that mostly exists. That we're mostly not in danger of like, and there's no evidence at all to suggest that we're in danger of creating it through like narratives and representation alone.
But like again, like, and I'll just one more thing, and I'll promise to be done. Like again, like what if like there's a woman, right, who has been, she heterosexual, but she's been abused by men, right? Like a series of men throughout her life, and she literally can't even trust men, right, anymore, right? Can't even trust to be intimate with them. And then she's like, all right, let me be intimate with this other person, this friend of mine, right, a woman, just cause, you know, like I want intimacy in my life, then I'm gonna do that, right? And she finds intimacy and they have sex, right? But she doesn't have like desire for this other person. This other person can make her feel good because, you know, stimulation just feels good no matter who it comes from, right? And you can orgasm and all that, but there's still no desire. Is that woman gay? She is environmentally pushed towards like homosexual acts, but is she even gay in the first place, right? So yes, maybe, or no, maybe. I don't know.
And this is a scenario. I know multiple women who have had exactly what you described. And I know multiple women who have chosen life partners with other women after having been abused by a male partner. So yeah.
If they're attracted to them, wouldn't that just be being bi and swearing off men? Just to be clear.
These questions are, you can't open someone's mind and never know that. If you want to make generalizations towards why, sure, but again, and going back to what Fanatiq was saying earlier, you know. I think these questions they're not useless because I don't agree with them. I think they're useless because we need to go a level beyond that. I think we can all agree there's going to be some circumstances where perhaps there is a straight person who would have not prior had any LGBTQ affiliation that because of media representation then does. Sure. But the question I think, which is more important...
Wait, hold on. Wait. You're saying you think we can all agree with that. I don't think that's true. Why don't you ask that first? That's the reason why I was asking that question.
Well, what I'm saying is I think we can all agree that there are going to be situations where a person is more likely to do something because of social influences. The differences that we have are that you may think that social influence is going to happen solely because of that, whereas I might think it might be a combination of environment and biology. But more than that,
it was solely?
Yeah, no, I think we're acknowledging that it's a combination. I do think you can absolutely influence a kid into like homosexuality, for example, or like a certain gender expression. But I'm not saying I'm not saying that's the only like thing, like what they're watching on TV is the only thing. Like it's be everything else in their life, right? So like, I don't think anybody's making that claim.
What I mean,
like LGBT parents. Oh my bad. This is like it's something I thought. I think LGBT parents have like a higher likelihood of having LGBT children. It's not dramatic. It doesn't go up to like 75%. But like, yeah, your parents are gay. Like,
Yeah,
so perhaps I'm phrasing it wrong. What I mean to say is that those things are there. We can agree. We disagree on what the reasons are, but those things are there. I think the more important question is to go beyond that, and we need to understand that gender expression isn't designed to be like this needle that hits everybody. It's more designed to be like a shotgun blast that affects people on average. If we decide to go to this absolute destigmatization where you can, address yourself as whatever you want, you can have that LGBTQIA representation. Sure, we can agree. Maybe there's people who would have never had these issues that could be the argument. But I don't think that matters, because on average, I would rather have a world where some fake trans people exist than have a world where real trans people aren't allowed to exist. Yeah, I'd rather have that shotgun blast.
But that wasn't the question. The question was about homosexuality.
We can shoe in homosexuality for everything that I just said. If we're talking about gender expression, there could be some people who... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if we're talking about homosexuality specifically, like any extent by all the science that we have, by any extent that you can like influence people to be homosexual, you could also influence them to be heterosexual. So it's sort of like painting it as like a binary issue sort of becomes a moot point unless we're advocating for like parents actively trying to like not let their kids be homosexual.
Yeah, that's I'm not arguing that, but I believe that's actually the position. Like I do believe that
you believe that's the underlying value.
Yeah, I don't think that people are born straight, but I do think that there are people that do say, we should make a necessary effort to make as many people heterosexual as possible.
Well, people are largely born straight. I mean, like we're born mostly.
Wait, but that's not.
I didn't like girls when I was 2. Like I didn't have a sexual attraction.
Okay,
I don't think there's any indication that it's innate, like at all. I know that they've been looking for the gay gene forever, right? They haven't found it. It doesn't exist.
Well, I think we found it in your hat, dude.
Still do studies to suss out whether or not something seems to be innate to an individual, or it's socialized to the long run. We can still like do a best guess determination here without necessarily seeing the gene that causes a certain behavior.
Yeah, but the best guess determination is that it's a combination of multiple things, and genetics is like 25% of it, right? So like, I don't think it's fair to say that.
Coming into that determination.
I can post it. I did some reading on this previously, then I did some reading on it yesterday, because it's actually sort of what the topic on Prime's panel was last night that we were kind of arguing about. And yeah, I just double checked again, and yeah, everything that I've been able to find says that it's a combination of genetics, like hormones, your environment, and things that you're like socially exposed to, right? So like.
Hormones are largely going to be innate at a very young age, at the very least, right? Before
but that's like
much all biological.
Sure, right? But again, it's a combination. So I'm not saying that doesn't influence it. Obviously, it does, right? But it's not the majority. It's
You're saying that smaller 25% number. If that 25% was genes, and then we're lumping in hormones as well, like the hormones are still fair to lump at least largely into the like mostly innate category.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Sure. I mean, all little things could be like 90% of it. The thing is, and I think is like the question that Fanatiq asked is like, is it a factor, and would that factor make some people otherwise not? Like how Pon said, fake trans people are fake gay people. I don't think that they would. I don't think that. I'm not talking about fake. I'm saying that people are like legitimately, this is who I am. This is the way I am. But I don't know how I became this person. Just like and we do this not just with sexuality, but with like everything that makes us who we are. People who are angry, like who have like violent tendencies, like they didn't make themselves. It's not a decision they came to. But their environment, like they grew up in an environment that led them to being like an angry person. So now they're hot-headed. To a degree, like that, that's not all gene. They didn't have the hothead gene. They just grew up where like, this is what I do now, and like I don't think they chose that. Like I think that's something that was ingrained in them from a really young age.
Yeah, fake was hyperbolic. I apologize. I guess what I mean to say is that I understand where we can be coming from looking at these different issues, and then going back and answering Fanatiq's question. I don't know. I think that there's a lot of science that points both ways. I don't mean to say that it's not an important question, because we can't. To me, it's a question that I'm not sure we can even know the answer to with what we have.
Oh, we definitely can.
In my opinion, I don't think we can have the answer.
I mean, like
we can
easily decide whether or not
wait 1 second. You say you definitely can?
Yeah, I don't think that. Well, actually, I take that back. We may eventually hit brain scanners that can like pull out find the gauging, like that may pop. But I just like mean in the world we currently exist in, we like I can't decide that like someone who came out a way like, oh, like there was 100% chance they were always going to be this way, or if under a different set of circumstances, if things could have potentially been different, or if people who like, because the reason I feel the way I do is because I don't believe that it sounds really weird to me to think that there's like a set percentage of the population that like genetically always comes out a certain way. Like there's always been the same amount of gay people in society. Like I don't believe if you go back 500 years ago, like the exact same percentage of gay people existed in that period that it exists now. And it's
well, in some cases, depending on the culture and the time period, there was a lot.
Culture.
There was a lot. Well, there was a lot more expression. But in, like, for instance, in Germany through the 1800s, female impersonators weren't an uncommon thing. They were actually an attraction, and you would go to like pubs to see female impersonators like dance and stuff and do all this kind of stuff. And they, I forget the name that was for it. There was like a specific name for what they did, and some of them lived life expressing femininely most of the time, but they didn't do it as much. Like they couldn't do it out in public all the time. They had to do it in pubs or at home and such like that. And there were a lot of stories about it and such that got, unfortunately, a lot of research on it and such that had been unfortunately burned by when the book burnings were going on. So a lot of the book burnings that had gone on during the rise of the Third Reich were there were like a lot of studies on homosexuality and gender identity and stuff like that have been burned in the process. But some of that has been recently unearthed and rediscovered, and so we've relearned about this stuff and how more accepted it was to be identifying for like a male to be identifying in a feminine way.
Yeah, but that's the thing though, right? So and when those things were burned, when those people were killed and all that behavior was suppressed, you didn't see it as often anymore, even when the Nazis were gone. Right. So I think that's what we're talking about. So the culture existed at some point in Germany for those people to go out and dress as women. Right. And I think that if we're acknowledging that there is like an intent, right, with some of these companies to mold the culture in a certain direction, I think it's reasonable for people who don't want it to go in that direction to say, hey, I'm no longer going to show my kid Disney films. I don't want Disney involved in my legislation. I don't want them, whatever. Because I think that's what we're running into. A lot of people don't want. Pons, you said earlier, hey, if this leads to there being more trans people, but the trans people that exist feel more comfortable. Well, that might work out for you, but like trans people are like 1% of the population right now. I think it's like 1%. What if it becomes like, what if it becomes like 2% or 3%? Now we got so many more people that are going to go through a ton of struggle that is totally disconnected from the environment that they're in. Right? So
hold on, less general than that. Then the question becomes, if you guys all agreed with that first question, I wish I'd gone through the table and just made everyone answer the question individually so we could have gotten to this part quicker. But then the next question becomes, if that's the case, if it is the case, and we do all accept, as Pons was suggesting, that there can be social or environmental influence towards more LGBTQ like participation or LGBTQ identity, then do you think that parents have license then, or do parents have license to then say, I don't want my children watching Disney, or to be outraged at the idea that Disney would be doing this with the idea that this could socially or environmentally influence them into becoming more, alphabet?
I'll quickly respond to Doobie. First off, I think everything you said is completely legitimate. Of course, I don't agree with any of that. I'm on a completely different side. But when you say like, this is what I see, I don't want my kids theoretically to be taught that. Well, of course, right? That's why if I have kids, I'm not going to take them to church because I'm not a Christian. I think that it's fine to go with that and say, okay, well, I'm not going to show my kid this particular media. That's all completely reasonable. And I think saying that even going further than that, if you wanted to boycott them or even go outside their building with picket signs, I think that that's all completely legitimate as well. because that creates the conversation that we're having right now, which is like, what the fuck is actually going on? And you know, I just think there's value in that.
Yeah, we need to put a stop to all this gay stuff until we can figure out what the hell is going on. I'm okay with parents having you know, more autonomy over how it is that they raise their children. Like, that's one of the things I kind of want to push back on a little bit, is I feel that there's a little bit too much hyperbolic and like aggressive attempt to shame parents into you know, like opening a door against their will into a lot more exposure to these things. I think that parents should have a bit more autonomy in how it is that they raise their children, and there's, like, obviously you hear about like some of the language that's used. It's like, oh, they're killing their children because, like, you know, in the case of dysphoric people, there are higher rates of suicide, and so they say, you know, you not letting them you know, be freely exposed to this and being able to, you know, do all these things, you're risking their lives. I think that gets to be a bit problematic. I think there are sort of limits to how much you can intrude on what a parent can do in terms of raising their children, and I think it gets a little too hyperbolic and too aggressive right now. So I think parents should be well within their rights to regulate the exposure to these things if they want. But I still think that it's for a company like Disney to go and sort of pave the way for more exposure to these things, if parents want to allow their children to see it. I think it's perfectly within their right to do that, as well as with other media companies.
Sure, right, but I think, but here's the issue that I'm like actually concerned about. So I think there's some disagreement about the LGBT stuff, but what if Disney wanted to push a message that we all found like objectionable, and this is their private company, right? And Disney, we're speaking about them as if they're like just another company, but they own the fucking majority of what children are going to be exposed to on television, right? Their market share is fucking huge.
Yeah.
Right. They're a vast like media empire. Right. So
people can take Harry Potter away from their kids too. You know, I mean, like, I'm okay with
if they started pushing
that. I still think it's silly.
Yeah. If they started pushing messages that were harmful, right? Like that could be a problem for us, right? Like going in the future, right? So maybe like, should we instead be talking about whether or not it's reasonable to have companies that are this large, that can influence our culture so much and have for so long, right? And whether or not it makes sense to instead like break this company up, because right now the American culture is in a lot of ways a product of Disney, right? If we really like break down how long they've been at this.
Can we clarify, Doobie? I mean, it sounds like you think that there might be an additional, we'll call it like a weight put on the company by virtue of it being so big. Do you think that we should have different standards for what a company is allowed to push based on how big it is?
Is this specifically a Doobie, or is that a question?
That was kind of what Doobie said, but it could be a general question.
Doobie can answer.
I think I wouldn't allow them to get this large in the first place. Would be the thing.
Sure.
To the point where they can actively, like, visibly influence our culture, like, today, right? And again, they've been at this for decades.
So,
right? So
then it's fair to say, like, they're like your only exception there, kind of. This isn't like a rule you hold ubiquitously for big media. Just Disney particularly is like the biggest and probably only example of like a company that has too much influence to say something like that. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Sort of, yeah. But I think I'd apply this to like news networks too, right? Like there are a lot of like massive media networks. There aren't a lot of them. There are a handful of massive media networks that exist that I think massively shape our culture, massively shape the daily conversation, and kind of drag the population around one way or the other based on whatever.
Right, but so
Disney has a special social cachet that like other movie studios don't have, right? People say, I'm gonna go watch a Disney movie, right? No one says they're gonna watch a fucking WB movie. Like, who the fuck cares, right? The only label that has anything close to that is now Marvel, right? When people say, I'm gonna go watch a Marvel movie.
Which
but
is now
even
owned by
then,
Disney.
which is now part of Disney. Yeah, it swallowed that whole thing up. So I would agree with
in Star Wars.
In Star Wars, yeah. So I would agree with DB on that level. But I wanted to answer Fanatiq's question because he wanted us to get to somewhere. Could you TLDR for me so I can make sure I'm getting exactly what you want?
Oh, the question was basically if there is an environmental and social influence on like people being alphabet, then do parents have a justification, or is it reasonable that parents would then say, I don't want this being represented to this degree, or I don't want my children exposed to this, as this might increase their alphabetness?
So probably like 3 yeses, I think.
I sympathize with confused parents, but ultimately no. It's not very reasonable, unfortunately.
Wait, hold on. Prime was answering first, then you can go. He asked me to so that he can finish answering.
I would and a problem me. I see where you're going with this. And I don't think it's reasonable. Like I think parents have the ability to do whatever they want, right? So like no one gives a shit what I have to say. But like I think that that comes from a place of fear of the unknown, and I think a lot of people have, just like what you guys were going for. I think DB was maybe alluding to this, right? That's people, the regular average Joe doesn't like put the level of thought that we do into gender, right? And it's super scary for them when they hear about like all these lifestyles that they have no experience with, and none of their friends admit that they have an experience with, right? So they're going to react the way they're going to react. But I would say that comes from a place of ignorance, or sometimes out and out bigotry, for a few of them. And so, no, I don't think it's a good thing, but it's a thing they're going to do. I'm not sure if I answered your question. If I didn't, let me know.
Close enough. That's fine.
Okay.
Professor Meat.
Yeah, I would just say that, like, if we're talking about reasonable, Prime pointed out a good distinction. Like, to me, what Prime's trying to point out here is that, like, there's a worthwhileness to having a degree of sympathy towards parents in this regard because of the confusion and the complexity around this issue. But at the same time, it's ultimately no more reasonable for a parent to try to deny the education of like a gendered experience to their children, in my mind, than it is for them to like teach their kid to be racist or teach their kid to be homophobic.
I want to respond, but has everyone answered?
Yeah, I'm wanted to answer.
Oh, yeah.
I think that it's an expectation that parents can have, like, okay, like, again, I think parents should have, especially while their kids are children, have some say so over their well-being and their exposure. I'm pro like gender affirmation, but I'm also understanding the kids say things. Like, I think that it's okay for a 7-year-old to feel a type of way, and us to, instead of like jumping to the conclusion that like we need to affirm this child. I think that like a 7-year-old can say like, oh, okay, maybe they're a 7-year-old, but then but I think there's a age where you hit where that becomes now we're getting into a toxic, irresponsible place. Like when you get closer to puberty, when you get to 12, 13, 14, like when you've had this over an extended period of time, like it's time to get some professionals involved. There may be something actually here, and I think
that's fair. And I think that it's also worth, I just want to make my position clear, at least, like, I do think that, like, we need to draw hard lines and separate, like, what we're going to, like, tell parents to do and not. Like, I don't think any of us are, like, actually would want to, like, for example, even if we're talking about homophobia or racism or whatever, would advocate for, like, actually going into parents' households and, like, punishing them for teaching their kids whatever. Like, we, practically speaking, as a society, want to protect parents' rights to teach their kids whatever they want in their household, but we do have to draw these hard and sometimes uncomfortable lines, like around religion, that we've already had to deal with in our history. Sometimes we have to draw these uncomfortable lines where we say, listen, you can have your own opinions, but you don't get to tell us what we teach in the classroom. We teach evolution in the classroom, despite the fact that there are thousands of parents, maybe more, who are like, really don't like that, right?
Kids not opt out anymore? I legitimately have no idea if that's still kids used to be able to opt out to those sections. And
they might be able to, and we could get into if we wanted to. I don't think it's the argument we want to have, but there is a fair issues to be raised, I think, with like whether or not it's problematic. Good questions to be asked, I think, with whether or not it's problematic or okay that like we allow for like these opt-out parts of our society, because then it begs this question of like, what's even the point of our education system, right? And like requiring it. But that I don't want to get too far into weeds in that unless everyone else would like to, because it is a little tangential.
No, I don't think that. I think that's fine. The only other thing I wanted to say was, again, like I said, while I think that their parents have a right to feel that way, I think that people who have an issue with these things, again, I think it comes from, this was the obvious conclusion of, like, living in a society that always shamed the concept of liberal arts and shamed the concept of doing art is gay. Like, you're going to get the people who control your culture, who are going to like overwhelmingly come from certain, like, either they're going to be like members of the LGBT community, or they're just going to be like generally allies, more accepting of these people, because this is a lot of people you're going to be shaped around and shamed around. So like, yeah, it's kind of understood what happened. It's like people were upset that the Daily Wire, I guess, is trying to push back against this, trying to do conservative media, or like, when I say media, I mean like children's media, like, and I don't know. I think they have a right to do it. I think it'll probably be lame, but I think that's exactly what you do. You don't force people to do things. If you feel like there's a cultural influence, then yeah, shift the culture, like, and not like a harmful like talk, like, if like that would be. If like I guess response to the first question, if you do believe there's a social element, I don't think you come down with a hard hammer. If you have an issue with that social element, then you shift that social like conditioning that creates that, without like shaming people.
Yeah, I want to capitalize even on what you said. You said make the social change. I think, yes, the social change, and we have to admit that is slow. It's very, very, very slow. When women got the right to vote, it's not as if they went home and their dads suddenly treated them as equals to their brothers, right? It took time, slowly, to shift the culture. Yes, maybe my dad is going to be bigoted forever, but I can have kids and I can be less bigoted to them. We could slowly shift these things. I think that as a on the progressive side of things, on the lefty side of things, we want to say like, hold on, these things are too far. We shouldn't allow these things. But I think that in some ways we're kind of scared that we're not going to be able to shift the conversation there with time. And I think we should be more confident of that. We've shifted the conversation so much to where now trans people, I think most people in the country would consider being trans at least morally neutral, with exception maybe to religious institutions. I think that would be a fair thing to say. And I think we can continue to go down this direction. I mean, Black people are still not treated equally in this country. And it's been how many years now? Like, we have a long way to go. It takes time.
Doobie, can you answer it?
Answer the question or what he just said? Yeah, I think what he just said was bad. Just the last portion.
Answer the question and then respond to what he says. You're the last person to answer it. Wait, Zoni, did you answer it?
I already answered.
Okay, yeah. Doobie, you answer the question.
The question is basically, is it reasonable for parents to not want to expose their children? Yeah, I think it's totally reasonable. I think it's reasonable for the LGBT thing, but also if parents want to teach their children certain gender roles, right? Like, men are supposed to be this way, women are supposed to be this way. I think it's totally fine too. And I think that it's actually like, because I'm somebody that like, I don't want to say I'm like traditional, right, when it comes to like gender shit, but I'm pretty traditional, right? I think I grew up with 3 sisters, one of them's now trans, whatever, right? But I had 3 sisters as a kid, right? And we weren't treated the same. We were treated very, very different. In some ways that were pretty good for me, some ways that were fucking awful for me, right? But the way different roles in the family, like what was expected. And I think that's fine. I think that just because like the reality, the biological reality, the physical reality of being a man versus being a woman, there's certain things that I think it's fine to, there's certain like ways in which I think it's fine to like teach children to behave differently based on whatever gender or sex they happen to be.
Well, I think there's a difference.
So parents want to like, so parents want to reinforce it in their children and don't want their children to be tilted one way or the other by Disney or by Rupert Murdoch or whoever the fuck else. I think it's totally reasonable for them to not expose them to that. I'm sure a lot of progressive parents wouldn't expose their children to like very Christian like films, right? That push like a certain narrative.
Well, then you're definitely going to make them
But there's
gay.
a difference between saying that you have to be this way because you're. I want to push back. I want to just clarify this difference between like what is understandable versus reasonable. Because I would say I think it's understandable for parents to have certain ideas or like certain predilections or certain inconsistencies in their ideology, etc., or certain ignorances, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think it's reasonable for them to have a position like that because when you're in one case, we're like giving people options. We're not telling them they don't have to be a certain way, like with Christianity, right? Like we're not advocating for our children to be Christian if I'm an atheist, for example, or vice versa. There's a difference between telling them they don't have to be a certain way versus telling them they do necessarily have to be a certain way. Because when you tell them they have to be a certain way because they're a boy or the girl, you're advocating for like there's inherent value statement and stigma there that isn't really commensurate with reality. Like when it comes to human behaviors and values, men and women are far more alike than they are different. The differences arise at the margins, at the extremes. Just because that's how bell curve distributions work.
I think I'm kind of curious as to like what you're referring to, because even the way you dress, right? So if I have a little boy, I'm not going to let him wear a dress, right? And that's not because I think dresses are like he's like allergic to them. It's because in the society that we live in, a man walking around in a dress is going to be seen differently, maybe negatively by a lot of people. It's going to make his life harder.
Not
right?
if it was
So do you see how you said the society that we live in, though, right?
Yeah,
you
not
see
if
how
it
that
was
differentiates it?
Yeah, but I prefer that society. I don't like it when men wear dresses. I think it looks disgusting, right? So because I prefer that society, right, I'm gonna keep keep that stigma alive, and I'm gonna say, hey, if you're a little boy, you don't wear a dress.
Do you think it's reasonable to dictate to your child what they should and shouldn't be just based upon whatever you just like as your personal preferences?
I think that's kind of what parents do.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Yeah,
much
actually,
exactly.
Parents do.
I think they do that, and I think to a degree it's understandable, but I don't think I wouldn't call it reasonable by any means.
I think it's just
reasonable.
absurd.
So if my kid watched like wait, hold on. So if my kid watched like Mad Max and he saw a character with a fucking crazy haircut, right? I'm not gonna let him get the haircut. Like even if he wants
it. That's not hopefully, right? If you were being as reasonable as possible, it wouldn't be because of the ugly, because you just don't like it. It would be because of the ways that like the effects you think it's going to have on him as he tries to interface with society. You would think
it would be because I don't like it because it makes me look bad for allowing him to do that, and because it's gonna hurt him socially, and the other kids are gonna bully him, right? So
that's why it would make you look bad if you were being reasonable, right?
No, it would make me look bad for allowing my kid to have a crazy fucking haircut and look like an idiot.
Dude, I was so influenced by Mad Max when I was a kid.
I'd look like a fucking like a deadbeat dad or something, allowing my kid to have a crazy ass haircut, knowing because I'm the adult in the situation, and I should know that hey, if you get this crazy ass haircut, things may be a little harder. So I should teach my kid, hey, don't do shit that's gonna make your life harder for no fucking reason.
That's the reasonable position. But if you were doing it just because you didn't personally like it, I would call that.
But it's all those things. It's not just
part of it. Do you not think that's good enough on his face for like again? We're not talking about a 17-year-old like someone's taking their last step into adulthood. Like, do we like think it's
it can be within a margin of acceptability, like with haircuts, for example, without it necessarily being reasonable.
But I'm saying that like
I'm just trying to differentiate between these two things.
Yeah, but that value is made by the parent.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, but like I think that it's okay to decide, like, for a parent to say, like, you know what, I want my child to be someone that I would like personally. Like, I want them to be, even though they're gonna grow up to be their own person, I want them to be an extension of me. I want them to be someone I can be proud of. Like, do you think that that's a bad thing for a parent to? Do you think a parent should just like you're free?
No, not categorically, but I think we can all agree that like a parent trying to live vicariously through their child is an example of how like that can go too far and become like what I would call, to a certain extent, because of psychology, and I'm a relatively empathetic person, I like to consider myself, to a certain extent I would understand how a parent could like turn that want and that need into like a thing where they are trying to like control their child. But even though I recognize that came from a somewhat understandable place, I still think it can get to a point where it's being unreasonable.
Wait, me,
sure, but that's like at the extremes, right? So like and I could come up with an extreme too. If my kid wanted a face tattoo, I say, hey, no, kid, don't get a face tattoo. You're a fucking idiot. Don't do that, right? And it'll be because it makes me look bad, but also because I know it's a bad life decision for him, and because I know other people are gonna look at him a certain way, right? So like it's all these things. It's not just the one.
Can I ask, do you think that there should be like a universal set of values that parents should be responsible for instilling in their children? Because it kind of sounds like where you're getting at is that like there should be like parents can teach their children to be different in different ways, but there's some set of rules that every parent should be expected to teach their child. And I'm not talking about morally, like don't kill. I'm saying like their own personal values, like being a Christian or being agnostic. Do you think that there should be like a universal set of rules that parents should be raising their kids by to kind of make it more inclusive? Yeah.
Oh, certainly not. But the thing is these a part of how these things get parsed out, like our values as a society, is through a discourse about these things. And part of that is shaming. Now it can go too far and it can get toxic. But I'm just saying that like part of the way we suss those things out, especially in the areas of our lives where we try to give like freedom to each other to make these sorts of determinations, like as parents, for example. We try when we leave those parts, we're sussing out those things to society, those values, it becomes a conversation among one each other, where it's okay to be like, that's bad, even if this is the differentiation between acceptable versus reasonable, right? To a certain extent, a certain degree of unreasonably becomes unacceptable, but what's
your prescription? I know we're having the conversation right now. What do you think we should do about it? Like, do you think there should be like a law made? Do you think it should just stay in conversations?
I think we should. I don't think we should start like legislating the conversations that parents have with their children, unless it literally somehow maybe could get into a point of like psychological abuse, which of course you'd have to prove legally, right? So that's not really necessarily what we're going to be talking about most of the time. What I think that like talking about having conversations like this, where we can say, hey, I get it, but also parents, you're wrong. I think that that's basically the prescription. We need to be able to explain this. We need to be able to have conversations like that where we explain why you're not necessarily transphobic for having these positions. And that's how we get them in. And then once they're in, you say, ideally, right? That's how you get them in, at least the ones that will hear you out more easily, right? The more good faith people. That's how you get them in. And then you say, even though I get it, you're still wrong and unreasonable.
Okay. Quick question. Like, would you be like, just what I'm saying, like, we're not talking even legislate. We're just talking about socially. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that like it would be good if parents decided, you know what, like the kid pops out and then they become who they become? Like, do you think that parents shouldn't have any influence on their children? Like, do you think that would be a better?
No, because here's the thing is that like, parental influence we overestimate the degree of which parental influence has on the children as long as they're like abstaining from certain abusive behaviors. But generally speaking, like there's a whole bunch of a huge degree demonstrably of child's like personalities are societally influenced and are up to us to shape into a healthy way, because we can show that like to a certain extent, like having an involved parent, having a parent that like cares about you and that doesn't abuse you to an extent, having like healthy peer groups, like these things do adjust your perspectives. And it is better to engage in these things than to not engage in these things. So we get better outcomes when we allow for parents to have overall on average, right? When we allow for parents to have freedoms on how they govern their children's behaviors. But that's why we try for practical reasons. That's why we have to, for the practical reasons of living in the society we all want to, separate that and allow them to have that while not necessarily letting the values of the parents contradict like or determine like of some parents, I guess, determine what we necessarily like the conversation that we have about or gatekeep us from like, again, being sympathetic while still saying that people are wrong or unreasonable.
Well, the thing is, I'm not even talking about maybe you're thinking about a super important metric value. I'm saying I want my child to have good taste in movies. I want my child to know how to dress well. Like, and by what I determine, like what I consider to be dress well. So I'm saying like this is something that like, does it really matter?
Like, where's the unreasonable versus reasonable version of that, right? I think that's a good question. So I think there's actually a parallel to be drawn here, a worthwhile parallel. So the way I would answer that and the way that's relevant is that there's probably a good way and a bad way to do that. And the way you differentiate between the two is that with the good way, you're basically giving your child an option. You're showing what you like, you're giving them options to movies, but when you start to judge them for not liking the movies, when you start to apply like leave room for negative value statements, and you're like making them feel like they have to be a certain way, that's when you're potentially starting to like influence your child in a weird way that I would consider like relatively unreasonable, probably going to get worse results, probably not going to have the results that you're looking for, unless you're trying to make the kid resent you or hate the kinds of movies that you like. You might get the kinds of results that you want, but you can see where I'm going with this, right? Like,
okay, I got you. That was just to clarify.
Bam, I like where your head's at. I'm for feral children. Like, just throw
more
some meat
Mad
at
Max
them.
references there too.
Throw some meat at them every so often, and then hope for the best. No, I think that I stand by what I said previously in that parents are going to do what they're going to do. I think it shouldn't be encouraged that like this idea that you need to protect your kid from these influences, from the influences of the LGBTQ community or their representation or whatever the fuck, right? I think that it's a bad impulse, right? There's lots of bad parenting impulses, things that parents want to do, right, that are disastrous for their children. I think trying to protect your kids from these things, even if they're cishet, right, in the end, like actually just cishet kids, that'll make them worse people, right? Like not understanding that the LGBTQ community is there, right, and what it looks like and how they interact with each other, and that it's just okay for them to exist out there in the world. I think you're going to raise a worse kid. Now you have the ability to do that, right? Just like you have the ability, and I think Professor Meat said it well previously, just like you have the ability to like teach your kids a bigotry, or if not teach them bigotry, simply like not talk at all about race, right? And not really like, have an honest discussion about these things. You can choose to do that with your child, but you're probably raising a worse kid. So it's not an impulse that I would encourage.
Or you're significantly limiting their experience in a way that can be deleterious, right? So I wouldn't even say worst child. I'd say that you are limiting you're limiting their options to a point where it can be both deleterious for their own experience in the world and their own, mental health and well-being, as well as for that of others, like in the case of not understanding race and things like that. So I kind of agree with you there, but at the same time parents still need their autonomy. I think this is something where it's kind of like the gradual exposure that is happening, which obviously there's a lot of fear mongering about, but the gradual increases in exposure of diversity in our world, in our broader culture, is little by little giving more avenues for that exposure for kids, should their parents choose to access that and grant them access to that, right? And the more that we can do to destigmatize like the LGBTQ community, the more likely it is that parents are going to feel more comfortable about allowing their children to observe and understand that, those aspects of life without forcing anybody's hand or anything, right?
Yeah. So I think you're touching on something that's really interesting. But I think most people, even like very conservative people, I think wouldn't care if this was just in movies, right? But I think where it becomes uncomfortable for people is when it seems to be targeted at children, right? So they're trying to expose specifically children to these things, because when most people hear Disney, they associate it with children's films and children's cartoons, right? And this is why I think linking it back to the Don't Say Gay bill. I wish I'd known this when I was on the panel, Fanatiq, but there was actually an incident in Florida that I don't know if it directly set off the Don't Say Gay bill thing. I hate calling it the Don't Say Gay bill, the parents' rights bill thing, whatever the fuck the actual name is. I don't even know, because everybody calls it the Don't Say Gay bill. But there was an incident in Florida where a child was expressing that they felt like they were trans, right? And their teacher allowed them to present that way in class, didn't tell the parents, and this went on for a few months, and eventually the child committed suicide. And the parents had no idea that this child was struggling with their identity, because the teacher didn't tell the parent. Right, and so when you have this parental rights bill thing come up, and it was seen to be saying, hey, you need teachers, you can't keep like shit like this from the parents. Teachers, you can't have lessons on gender identity and sexuality from before the kid's like 8 or 9 years old, right? There's this fucking like huge explosion of like vitriol and oh god, how dare you and blah blah blah. But what we're talking about right here is children, right? We're talking about exposing children to gender identity and sexuality and all these things. Right, so I think if it were just, hey, we're gonna have these in Marvel movies that kids watch when they hit the teenagers or whatever, most people wouldn't give a fuck. If it was just, hey, in high school they're gonna learn about trans people or whatever, most people wouldn't care. But if it feels like a lot of this is targeted specifically at children.
So I think that the bill itself was kind of an overreaction to something that, like, there were some things that needed to be done. Like, yeah, the parents being able to know that what their child was going through and having had no idea, and then their child committing suicide, that is definitely a problem. But I don't believe that there were that there were younger grades of children that were being taught about sexual orientation and gender identity, because that looked like that was mostly like a red herring.
Wait, so then really quickly, so if that's the case and that wasn't going to be taught, then what would be the problem with just putting that in the bill?
Because why do you add laws for things that aren't a problem yet, right? Then you get into that whole problem if you're just creating a bunch of legislation to lock people out of something, or try to targeting something that it doesn't exist, a boogeyman, effectively. You're trying to lock out a boogeyman.
So if this is a boogeyman and it doesn't exist, then this bill effectively does nothing. So then there's zero problem with the bill.
Yeah, I think the issue is that they're either there were incidents of teachers specifically doing these things in kindergarten, in first grade, that got some media attention. But also, I think a lot of these activist communities are attempting to get this stuff into the classroom as early as possible, as early as preschool in some cases.
See, that's kind of wild. But here's the thing: like, this is the issue that I found to be like the big problem, and this was brought up by multiple teachers in this case, where a child would ask, like, one of the things that was being used as an example of a lesson on sexual orientation was children asking their teacher, when the teacher would say my husband, and the teacher was male, he'd say my husband and I were out at such and such today, and we thought of this thing. So, and then the children say, wait, you're a guy, you're a man, what do you mean you have a husband? And so then he kind of just goes and explains, well, sometimes men marry men and sometimes women marry women, and kept it really simple. But that was being used as a thing to say, oh, that's a lesson on sexual orientation. The reality is that if the man had said my wife, nobody would have asked any questions, because you're exposed to that every single day. That is, everybody sees that. But if you don't see, a married couple of men very often in your life, then you're going to want to ask about it. And that isn't a lesson in sexual orientation, so to speak. They're not teaching about sexuality as like that kind of thing. They're teaching, oh yeah, just, sometimes men marry men as well, and sometimes women marry women.
I don't think
that's the thing that gets locked out by that bill.
Fanatiq,
because could be based on the interpretation.
Fanatiq, I don't think that you believe that, like, just because a problem doesn't exist, that a bill means nothing, right? So also in Florida, like, they're trying to get rid of CRT in math books, right? Like you can create a hysteria and create legislation around that hysteria, and then take governmental actions on a thing that doesn't exist, right? Like in the 90s, where they thought like childcare centers were like working with Satan groups, right? And their kids were being sacrificed. Like really bad things happened when we had that moral panic, right? They're having another moral panic on CRT. They're having another moral panic that trans people fucking exist, right? And then they're taking actions on that.
The issue with the CRT
thing. Wait. Let me respond to that really quickly. That's again, these are not even remotely close to the same thing. Like, I'm talking a bill about something that you say was never going to happen, and so therefore wasn't a problem. Then that bill has no weight, doesn't mean anything. Comparing that to a bill like CRT, about like something where people are trying to stop people from teaching CRT, which really was going to happen, which we really believe should happen, which we are aiming for to happen, is not the same thing.
But I just explained why it's a problem, how it has a negative effect. I just explained that basically what you're doing is you're legislating out a boogeyman or a red herring, and what the effect of that is, it does have a negative effect, because now someone like a gay man who is teaching a class, if he says, "Hey, my husband and I did this over the weekend," and the child asks, "Hey, what do you mean you're a man? What do you mean husband?" They're no longer allowed to explain that based on what we're hearing.
But I don't think that's true.
Justification. Wait a minute, before we get further away from that, I just want
to say but by default, the knowledge is there for heterosexual relationships, right? So you're locking out the explanation.
We're about to get away from it.
Wait, let them go first,
just because it'll be irrelevant if I say it later. I disagree with what you said. Like I agree with the first part. I think that being upset at a bill that literally does nothing, does nothing isn't an issue. I think the issue with the CRT thing is, like, I don't believe that critical race theory was ever going to be taught in elementary schools. I don't think that well, maybe you do, but I don't believe that would be taught in elementary schools. But I do think that what those bills actually do address is like culturally responsive teaching, which is a different CRT, as well as like being just Black history in general, which doesn't fall under the lines of CRT. Like, so that's what the bill says. The bill says that what the bill would actually be addressing is just general teaching on Black history versus like actual critical race theory. If a bill said you can't teach the college study level of critical race theory, then I wouldn't have an issue with that either. To elementary schoolers, I wouldn't have an issue with that, because I don't think that's happening.
But it's not locking out something from a marginalized group, right? So that's the problem with this. The way the bill is designed, if the parent disagrees with it, they can say, they're teaching my child about sexual orientation. I don't like this. I'm suing the school.
Not necessarily.
Very necessarily. About, right? This is the language in the bill.
Well, so the language talks about classroom instruction, and now the standards of. So there's a lot of states that haven't been defined yet that are going to be defined by the state later, and I think at that point we will definitely have a clear picture of how problematic this is. However, classroom instruction is not well defined.
But there's still the clause in there that the parents can sue the school.
No, so not necessarily. So the school has a chance to respond and resolve the issue, and if after, I believe, 30 days, if I'm not mistaken, they haven't resolved the issue with the school, or the school has not taken the appropriate steps to try to resolve the issue, then they can start to sue, or they can get a magistrate appointed by the state, which the school has to pay for.
Yeah.
And they're currently in the process of laying out the process by which that'll be.
They are, yeah, and it's the school board that's coming up with all the language to fill in the areas, the structure of it.
Right. So we will see, and I think the problematic nature of the bill, I think, unfortunately, like, this is a thing that might be problematic, isn't necessarily. And it's largely been blown up. I will blame the GOP for making it, because honestly, there's nothing explicitly about gender in the bill. The GOP, I think, honestly weaponized it being about gender ideology just to get votes, in my opinion. And I think that most of the less rhetorical response about the bill has been as a reaction to them making it about that. I think that this happens in politics a lot. It's not necessarily actually about what anyone is saying this about, unfortunately.
And something that should also be called out is that I think most of us are kind of like, usually, I don't know how many of you agree with it, but a lot of us are not happy with excessive legislation, especially without good reason for it. There's always legislative overreach, and that's something that as a culture we should be prepared to push back on. We should be prepared to push back on our legislators when they're legislating something that we feel is unnecessary. If they're legislating a boogeyman or something, we shouldn't allow them to just run free with it.
Okay, but I think the issue is that it's not a boogeyman, right? There are activists currently trying to get this into preschools, right? But wait, hold on. And with CRT, for example, through things like the 1619 project, there were activists that attempted to get that in school, right? They developed whole school curriculums for elementary school classes, right?
Was it critical race theory, or was it just general?
There's so much prerequisite knowledge for CRT. I don't know how they do that.
Hold on. Well, I want to post the curriculum in the group chat. Okay, like, this is just one of them. It's from the Pulitzer Center. This is like an example, and it has like, hey, here's how to get the students engaged. Here's a lesson plan. Here's a listening guide. Like,
is anyone planning to implement it?
Hold on. That's the thing. There are activists attempting to implement this
for elementary, because there's so much prerequisite knowledge for CRT.
No, it's not like saying calculus.
I'm sorry. If I can just jump in really quickly, because it seems like this is such a banal point. If we don't understand that you can like make something age appropriate, so something like critical race theory, if you don't think that there can be an age appropriate kindergarten or first grade level of critical race theory that delves into some of the differences between different classes or races of people, or even at the third grade level, that you can like literally go into the historical laws influence on the different outcomes between Black people. We did social science. We talked about the cause of the Civil War. We do all of these things. If you don't think you can make critical race theory age appropriate, which is just a study of how law intersects with race in this country, I don't know how we're even having a conversation at all.
Well, because you're delving in so much into law, that becomes a high school curriculum type level of thing, right?
No, but hold on, but it's not. That's not all CRT is, right? And that's not what the 1619.
It is what CRT is.
It is.
No, it's not. Don't say the CRT is just about law. That's not
what CRT
now we're getting into a CRT discussion.
Hold on, but it's just not.
This is going to spiral out of control.
Again, I posted the curriculum. If you think the 1619 project, which features CRT, right, aspects of CRT heavily, right, is all about the law, I just don't think you know enough about it. That doesn't matter. The point is that there are activists attempting to have classrooms implement this, right? And because that's true, right, there was a reaction from conservatives, you could say it's good or bad, I don't care, to stop this from happening because it was a foreseeable thing that they wanted to get in front of.
I think
just as with this gender identity stuff and sexuality stuff, there are plenty of activists attempting to get this stuff in as early as preschool, so people react and say, hey, we're going to make this illegal before it happens.
I think DB and Fanatiq are not being unreasonable.
It's not a boogeyman.
I think DB and Fanatiq are not being unreasonable in saying that, like, look, CRT was strictly defined as something like as a framework dealing with legal matters, right? It's supposed to like how do we look at how race interacts with the legal system. However, right, that doesn't mean that there isn't a broader conversation that uses a CRT-like framework, right? That activists aren't trying to put within schools, right? Like, hey, we should like look at race critically, right? How does it interact in your life in ways that you may not understand? And I think that Fanatiq is right to say that you can have a not dumbed down, a simplistic version of this, right? That a lens that you can teach to kindergartners, first graders, and the whatnot, which would be a good thing. Yeah, go ahead.
And one that could be a bad thing, right? But that's what. Isn't that kind of what the bill's for? Now we have a bill that's just, well, I mean, like, doesn't the bill? So I could be wrong. I could be misunderstanding. What my understanding of what we're saying the bill is that the parents can sue for this particular thing if they think that their teacher went too far. Not that they're going to, but rather that they can, and that
so they can sue for the school not taking the appropriate steps to conciliate with them.
Right. To me,
no, that's not true, though. I don't think that's what the bill says. Well, the suing thing. Hold on. The lawsuits come into play when the schools don't inform parents about situations like I explained earlier that happened in Florida, but before this bill was a thing, right? Where a kid was saying that they were trans. That they were trans, and the school never told the parents. The teacher never told the parents that their child was struggling with their gender identity, and that child ended up killing themselves. So if it's found that the school doesn't do something like that, doesn't tell the parents that their child is struggling with a severe mental health problem, then yeah, the school should be sued, right? But it has nothing to do with a teacher saying, "Hey, yeah, I've got a husband." Like,
right. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying is towards that is that if we're talking about going to court for this thing, well, then we're not talking about what we think. It's going to be decided in court. So I think people having the option to say, like, I want to sue this teacher for teaching my kid this thing. I think that that's okay if we go to court and we decide, okay, all he said was that he was married to another man. That's not a problem. Or actually, he told all the kids that being gay was awesome. I highly recommend it. Like, we can look at those things and iron it out in court. I feel like there's nothing
a real
wrong with
problem
that
there. Well, there's a real problem there because it creates an element of fear, particularly for LGBTQ teachers, right? So there's a constant worry. Like if you even let on to the fact, even say my husband, right? If you're a man,
but we've all decided that the bill really doesn't.
I've got the bill right here, by the way. I can clear this up.
Inevitably,
that's it right now.
It doesn't matter what the bill.
But it does. That's what the conversation's about, is the bill.
Because imagine, put yourself in the shoes of a gay man teaching a class and thinking about how if I let on to the fact that I have a relationship with a man in this class, is somebody going to interpret that as me trying to teach them about my sexuality?
Is that a legitimate fear?
So can I just be clear? Because we're like almost doing misinformation
right
now.
Yeah, wait. It doesn't matter what the like. I agree with Zonia. It doesn't actually matter what the bill says. Like I mean, it's fine if you want to talk about it, right? But like, it creates a level of fear. But it creates a level of fear, right? That this exists, and like people are going to set against themselves. It's going to censor themselves. It's just like someone brought this up last night on my stream. It's like the don't ask, don't tell, right? Like, it's effectively the same thing for so many people. Like, I literally can't express the fact that they are gay, and there will be consequences for it. Now, the bill could say there are no consequences. Maybe you'll get a raise. I don't know. But, like, the fear is out there. And the rhetoric is out there, and the governor is out there saying these things.
The fear comes from people who are opposed to the bill spreading misinformation about it.
No, there isn't.
It comes
because
from both. It comes
because
from both.
misinformation. No. Calling it a "Don't Say Gay" bill is misinformation.
Wait. We're talking four people at once. We're talking 4 people at once. So I'm just gonna say really quickly. I think it's a little bit ridiculous to say we're discussing a bill, and for someone to say it doesn't matter what the actual bill says. All that matters is the fear that's been built up against the bill. That'd be like the equivalent of someone saying it doesn't matter what Black Lives Matter means. All that matters is, or it doesn't matter what whatever slogan is. All that matters is people's opinion of it. Even when we're talking about a legal framework, that sounds crazy.
No, may I paint a scenario for you? So, if you're straight,
wait, really quickly, let me just ask this: is the scenario that you're going to paint for me, is it going to be something that falls under the jurisprudence or the framework of the bill? Because if you're going to, because again, you can literally just bring up any fear that has anything to do with that, and if it's completely extraneous from the bill, then it doesn't matter.
It's going to be specific to the bill, but
the bill itself, contained within the text of the bill and the interpretation and the framework.
Well,
of the
right,
bill.
No, because right now it's not done. Right, the bill is there, but it's basically completely open ended, and they're waiting for the Board of Education to actually fill in all the regulations. So there's no way for us to actually discuss the bill right now.
Well, that's not entirely fair. Come on, we can still discuss the underlying issues that are in the bill.
Well, this is what I'm going toward, because basically what the idea is that depending on what the Board of Education says, what curriculum is, right? If it falls within educating the children that same-sex marriages are a thing that exist, then you would have this problem where effectively anybody who is gay or lesbian or something like that, or let's say trans in the case of gender identity, who is a teacher who will be afraid to even speak about the fact that they have a husband or have a wife or that they're trans.
If I can, you have to understand.
And this is something that a cis het person does not have to worry about because it's just the norm.
Agreed, 100%. But you have to understand that these are not things that are a problem of the bill. This comes from people not understanding the bill. And yes, that's still bad. Yes, that still has negative effects. But that's a far cry from saying the bill is written wrong. I think that there are people who look at the bills written that happened after 2001, after 9/11, right? And they see that the government can spy on us, right? They misunderstand the bill. They think there's cameras in our toilets and that, the government's constantly looking at our buttholes. I don't think that that's a valuable thing for them. I don't think it's a legitimate fear of them to have, because then once you read the bill, you find out that's not actually what's happening.
Well, it comes down to what the Board of Education decides what the regulations are. Because right now,
but we're talking about a bill right now.
Right.
No, we're not talking about what the Board of Education decides.
When liberals and Republicans start to talk about, on both sides, starts to talk about what the bill necessarily means in ways that the bill doesn't necessarily reflect, I agree. It's a problem when Republicans do it because it causes this inflammatory rhetoric that causes this fear that can have an effect on people. Like there's reports that show that people in the trans community have had in these communities, in these areas, have had mental health effects due to the rhetoric around these things. But it also comes from the liberal side of the way they misrepresent it in response to the Republicans. And I'm not going to necessarily levy blame but I think there's a conversation to be had about the responsibility of rhetoric.
Of course, anybody who misunderstands the bill,
I just want to clear up this fact.
Yeah.
So in the name of misunderstanding the bill, I just wanted to clear up this fact so we can move past it and talk about things that based on things we're sure about. So what the bill says is, at a minimum, the procedures must require that within 30 days after notification by the parent that the concern remains unresolved, the school district must either resolve the concern or provide a statement of the reasons for not resolving the concern. If a concern is not resolved by the school district, the parent may, and at that point, it says that they can get a magistrate or bring action against the school district.
I have to go.
I just wanted to be clear.
Okay, you understand you understand what that's mirroring, right? That's the exact same as like employment claims. That's the exact same as suing someone for employment. You have 30 days to be provided an additional a statement about why you were terminated. If that statement isn't provided, then you have the right to sue. That's not saying that you can just go sue any company willy-nilly for firing you. It's that we always have the option based on the circumstances that are provided. But every company gets you have your due notice. I don't think there's anything wrong with if a school is going to
not necessarily
going to teach my kid in some way about this, that they should have to make an official statement. And if they don't, that's kind of sus and we have to look into that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And even if you think that that's for organic reasons, it's completely legitimate for a parent to see that and then be concerned.
Well, there's also I think to pivot to sort of be charitable to what she's saying. I think there is a reality of there's words in the bill, and then we understand that people are humans, and we create people create what is an intention, what is the thing trying to do, what is the heart of the law, the merit of the law,
garbage.
whatever. Yeah, but I don't think that's garbage. I think that's something that an actual legal precedent, like that. Whenever we look at things, we say, what were they intending? What was the goal of this?
And also, what are the possible
to interpret the law for us?
When people go to local level courts, and this is something
you can't civilly sue the school, right? That's not what we're talking about.
Yeah,
because civil court is when it's a civil suit so you can just go me versus the school. That's what you're saying. There's no lawyers.
Well, they have to. A
civil suit can still involve a lawyer.
They have to.
It can, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And the lawyer's not there to interpret the law. They're there to bolster your case. Whereas with a criminal suit or with any official suit above civil, at that point a lawyer's there to interpret the law for you, right?
And the school has to pay for the litigation costs, right? So
in both cases, the lawyer's there to bolster your case.
I know they're there to bolster your case, but in one of them, they're there to interpret the law. Lawyers don't typically interpret the law really in a civil case. It's just
they literally approach them.
Well, they argue for it. And the judge makes the final call.
No, absolutely not. A lawyer in a civil case is not making any legal arguments.
Oh, not for a civil case.
Right,
Sorry.
It has nothing to do with interpreting the law.
If we're talking a civil suit, yeah.
I work in this area.
But they do have to do. Yeah, I don't know all the language for it, but they do have to first define whether or not there is standing. And that'll be argued for, and that's where the interpretation of the law comes down to the judge.
That's before the civil suit starts.
Yes.
And by the way, you don't have to have a standing for a civil suit. It's not how a civil suit works. I could sue you civilly for $500 for stealing one of my Pringles. There never has to be. That's what civil suits are for. It's the public's chance to sue for whatever the hell they want.
Yeah, I guess
I'm asking if it's a civil suit or not.
Oh no!
There's already been cases with similar things. Wasn't there a lawsuit related to one of the trans athlete bills in a state that had I think one trans athlete? Again, I have a different opinion on that, but
sure.
But whenever when you go to court, we're not dealing with robots who are who are we can pretend people are impartial, but there are narratives. There are okay, this is we think there are people who are judges who have came out on their feelings on legislation and why they think things are good or bad for society.
Yeah, but not during a case, right?
Yeah.
No, that's they can't make a statement personally on how they feel the case is going during the case. It's against the law.
I feel like this happens all the time.
Do you think that a judge could be let's say trying someone for murder and they go off the stand and the judge says, "Wow, That guy really seems like he wanted to fucking kill somebody. You think a judge?
This is going off the rails. Here's the thing. This is going off the rails. Let's go ahead.
What's the relevance?
Yeah, I was gonna say we're going down an entirely different rabbit hole. So let's try to like reel it back in. We were talking about the bill and like whether or not like whether or not. I'm sorry. It seems like there are instances in different states like California and places that are actually coming up with curriculum, specifically around gender identity and sexuality for as low as kindergarten. That's happening in California, like as we speak. I live in the state. So then I think, and then there was, and not just in that single incident, Doobie, but there were several instances of multiple districts that had policies that specifically said that parents were encouraged to interact with students in a gender-affirming way, but encouraged to never mention that to the parents. And so this is where the bill started happening, where they were saying
wait one second. You said so teachers were encouraged to.
I'm sorry, teachers were encouraged to affirm identity, but there was policy that said that the teachers were not allowed to tell the parents. So this was creating environments where there were transgender affirming environments at the school that were intentionally being withheld from parents. So with that being known, that's where this bill was coming from.
I think there's a lot of people. There seems to be. I don't know about this panel specifically, but there seemed to be some a lot of people who had legitimate pushback against that, saying that like parents don't have a right to know if their child doesn't want them to.
Not necessarily. So this is why there is. So like generally speaking, I think we'd all like to live in that world, but like we all recognize that like there are instances, and the bill accounts for this. We all recognize, I think generally speaking, that there are instances in which like it would be okay for a teacher to be like, you know what? If I told this to the kid's parents, like maybe there would be abuse. Maybe they'd get beat for having a certain opinion or for feeling a certain way, or maybe they wouldn't be accepted at home. And there's language in the bill that allows for teachers to make subjective determinations like that. And there's an appeal process. There's lots of subjectivity in the kind of determinations that it allows room for in the bill. And I think this isn't necessarily now political narratives are a different thing, but the bill isn't necessarily about anything other than like fleshing out the way these systems of accountability get parsed out in a way that is maybe more practical.
Yeah. So okay. So given what Fanatiq just said, and I agree. I mean, I'm in California. I'm aware of this kind of stuff happening in California too, and I'm sure there are other cases in Florida that I don't know about, but I know of that one. Right, so if this is a case, these things are happening, and activists are currently trying to get this into the curriculum for kindergarten through third grade. Then it doesn't seem like it's a boogeyman this bill was like meant to fight off, right? There is a push here that these people oppose, and that push, like the Disney stuff people are concerned about, seems to be directed at children, right? I think that's what makes people uncomfortable.
I think it's a boogeyman for Florida. I think you're right about more progressive states like California. I guess if your concern is that other states will follow suit after California and New York and such, I don't know. I still see that as not very likely in the redder parts of the country. They still tend to be, not following suit with the social programs that the more progressive states do. So I think it is still a boogeyman.
I think my position has shifted like over the weeks and whatever since this thing just first came out. Like before, if like the reality is there is going to be some number of children who are very sure of their identity and sexuality as young as third grade and like below. But I don't think that necessarily them like that not coming up in school until fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth. I don't think that that's too late. I don't think we've missed the mark and they'll never feel. They'll never be able to feel truly represented as them true self, or never feel like we're done with children at that point. Like I actually don't think third grade is that bad.
I understand where, and again, I don't mean to generalize anyone as a conservative, just there's the two varying forces here that we kind of discussed. I understand when a conservative has fears like this, and I think they're legitimate. Something that really scares me as a lefty is that we kind of have like the culture on our side. And that's like, with great power comes great responsibility. Something that really scares me is that we see some ideas that are so obtuse to what we believe in, some ideas that are so abrasive that the go-to, and I'm not saying that's it in this case. Clearly the bill is not what we're discussing right now, but sometimes the go-to is to go a level beyond what I think is acceptable and say, not only do I think you shouldn't think this anymore, I think it should be like illegal for you to think it, or I think someone should be able to sue you for thinking it, and I think that it's a really toxic thing that we're creating where we want to peer into people's minds and see what they're thinking. It's an uncomfortable reality that you'll never get to see what someone's thinking. We just have to accept that, and we have to understand that people think things, even if it's completely different than us, it can be coming from a legitimate source.
It's always the overcompensation, right? And we were talking about that earlier on with like Disney kind of overcompensating in response to the backlash. And I think that this kind of is part of the whole like pendulum swing, right? Like somebody pushes really hard to overcompensate, and then the other side is like, oh my gosh, they're changing everything. They're going to have our kids marrying dogs, and then they're pushing back, and it becomes this big pendulum swing, and there's never really there's too much reaction and fear and propaganda that just causes more aggressive pushes from one direction to the other. So I don't even know what the answer to that is these days. Our media is just so propagandized and so dominated by certain types of ideological frameworks that everything is pushed to extremes and such, and we just got to deal with those pendulum swings. But I don't know. I don't even know the answer to that one.
That's a good point.
Well, listen, I think that's a good note to end it on. I think, man, I got to do a better job at booking more conservatives, but it's really hard to find conservatives in this space.
I was ready to argue
against
some conservatives,
man,
for
you if you want.
I honestly,
don't want anybody to play.
I think this was very productive. I think it's good to see that people on both sides, we can actually still find so much that we agree on. There really is just one or two things that make us want to shit on each other.
Who is the other side here?
Yeah, good question.
Well, I don't think
the other side
whoever
is
you are, but Doobie,
love is love, and human dog love is valid. Okay.
Well, I'll say that Doobie had some positions that seem like they contrasted with you guys, and I have a billion ideas that contrast with you guys. But I just can't. I like the idea of a round table, but there's too many people here for a round table, so I'm not going to spend my time like just fighting or whatever. But I do think there's always opportunities to have these conversations, and I think we can do that. We can do that by allowing more people to come into the space and continuing the conversation. But now that the panel is ending, I'm hoping some of you guys are willing to stay and continue to talk about it, and we'll try to open it up to a few more people that might want to come in and share their thoughts.
I know Pisco really wants to come in.
Yeah, my audience members have been asking that Pisco come in, and Pisco has lots of things to say to you, Fanatiq.
Oh God!
Oh man!
Oh Lord!
I've
got to get really semantic, but we're doing it.
Get your popcorn, boys.
I actually have to drop off because I have to pick up my little girl from the animal hospital. But I do want to give a couple shout outs before I go, if that's
we were going to get to that, obviously. So we're going to start with first off, I always like to say thank you guys for participating in the conversation. I think every time I have one of these conversations, to me, it's just proof that people can be adults if you prompt them to. And I think all of you guys are able to do so and like actually engage in a conversation. And, and people have different like communication styles. Some people are going to be more aggressive and like going to talk longer than others or whatever. But at the end of the day, the conversation was had. I feel like everyone should feel like they had ample opportunity to actually voice their opinions, to have their thoughts heard, to have them contended with. No one's just like brushing past everything you say and sweeping everything under the rug. And it's an actual conversation. We're not ad homing and acting like idiots. And I'm hoping that when we bring on, because I do plan on bringing on some more very contentious people, that when we have those conversations, you guys can be in just as good a faith, and that we can actually. That's not a person that I don't know.
Oh, he's bringing in more contentious than Chud Logic. Get ready.
No, there will be some really contentious Republicans. There's a person that I would love you guys to talk to named Kanisha Tachu. I think. Kanisha Tachi is going to be a great person for you guys to talk to, but I'm hoping you guys can be civil. Although I don't even know if she can be civil. We'll see.
Bring Hake on. I want to talk to Hake.
I'm telling you.
Only one way to find out.
We'll figure it out. That might be on YouTube. But in any case, thank you guys for like coming by and being part of these conversations. I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. We're gonna go ahead and give you guys some shout outs. You guys can obviously listen to my music at twitch.tv/Mr. Fanatiq. I'm working on the artist named Fanatiq. On the outro and intro of my videos, all of them, it's my music that I made. And now I'm starting to edit my own videos because you just can't trust niggas. And so, you know what I'm saying? Always check out the channel, Ask Fanatiq. I hope you guys like, comment, subscribe, and do all the good stuff. And Ponce, tell people, this is my first time actually having you on a panel. I'm glad that you came here. I think our conversations have been pretty freaking based. I hate that phrase. They've been really great.
No, take it back. You got to take back the word, okay? Don't let other people ruin the word, okay?
No. We're done with that. Anyway, tell people how to find you and all that stuff.
Listen, twitch.tv/justpawns, youtube.com/justpawns. Check me out on my discourse. I'm the equitable discourse guy. I like to have conversations that go somewhere. And a huge shout out right back to you, Fanatiq. You are one of the few people on this platform who wants conversations to mean something. And we should all be cognizant of that, and we should be happy about that.
Thank you. Zonia.
Yeah, I am Zonia Dead at Twitch is how you can find me. And on my Twitch, if you go to my about, you can get to my socials. And it's been great being on this panel. First time on a Fanatiq panel. I really enjoyed it. Some great people here. A couple of good friends of mine too, Prime and Doobie. Really good panel to be involved in. I enjoyed the discourse. Really good topic. Really good back and forth. The shout outs that I wanted to do, if you don't mind, pull up a couch, one of your followers, Fanatiq. Let me know in your chat that they followed me earlier, and they're my 1000th follower on Twitch. So thank you for that. And then Prime, I don't know if you noticed somebody in there. You had a new follower in the last 24 hours. Sierra Fairy Girl was in your chat for quite a while. She's my mom.
What? Really? She subbed. I noticed this person subbed while I was offline.
I'm so happy you told me that. I was going to say terrible things for in chat earlier.
I'm still going to say terrible things. So.
Yeah, so that was kind of cool to see her interacting in chat regularly and being subbed to you and having followed you over the past 18 hours. I was like, that's wild.
That is cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool. Anyways, thank you for bringing me on, Fanatiq. I really appreciate it. Great time.
You're very, very welcome. Next, I'm not giving an intro for every single person because they just don't all deserve it. You know what I mean? Like I'm particular about those kinds of things. But this guy absolutely deserves an intro 100% of the time. PrimeCayes, I genuinely appreciate you for being part of the conversation and being in this space. I feel like you've kind of, like, I've obviously been inspired by you in a great way as far as the panels and things. I never did panels, wasn't really interested in hearing other people's thoughts. Being in your panels is literally what shifted me in that way. And I sincerely appreciate you for just being in this space for this length of time, for like elevating Black voices through the All Black Everything panels, elevating women's voices through the Amazon Lily panel. I didn't check it out yesterday, but I definitely canceled my own panel on that same time because I'm definitely not ever trying to compete with you. And I feel like those voices and those spaces that you have occupied are really important. And I'm hoping that you kind of get more prominent in that area and start doing that again in a full-time way. I just appreciate you for like all that you've kind of done for myself and plenty of other minority voices in the community. Anyway, shout outs to where people follow you and all that kind of stuff, please.
Oh man, I really can't do a better job than that. I won't try. Yes, everyone, please come follow me. My name is Prime, PrimeCayes. Come follow my channel here on Twitch or on YouTube. I got a YouTube channel. I oftentimes do gaming streams. I might do a gaming stream tonight, actually, too. Yeah, we do panels and all that good stuff. And we invite dope people, or dope people just wander in like Mr. Fanatiq did so many months ago. All right, so yeah. And just separately, hey, Fanatiq, could you give me an invite link to your channel? I'm gonna send it to Pisco. He's trying to get in.
Oh, sure. Everyone could just find it. Look on twitch.tv/Mr. Fanatiq. Just type !Discord.
I'm in my thing. I'm in my thing.
It took me too long.
In my stream app. Just send me it.
All right. I'll give it to you. Give me a minute.
Okay. Meat.
Professor Meat, thank you for being part of the conversation. What you got to say?
Hey, yeah, thanks for being part of the conversation. It was, I definitely felt like everyone here was like, at least largely was like trying to hear each other. It was a pretty good faith conversation. I feel like it was somewhat productive. I feel like I probably could have pushed back on a couple things better, but I enjoyed the conversation. Good to see some familiar faces here that I'm familiar with, people I was less familiar with before. Yeah, Professor_Meat on. I'll keep it short and simple, I guess. Beyond that, Professor_Meat on Twitch. To check me out. I am too one of these, whether or not they know it yet. I too am one of these dope motherfuckers who just wander onto a PrimeCayes panel, and here I am. All right, so I hope to be popping around more often. Need to get back to the PrimeCayes opens and stuff, but yeah, thanks for inviting me. I hope to have more conversations like this in the future.
Absolutely, thank you so much. Oh, I'm not here.
Hey, Prime, thanks for inviting me to the. Yeah, thanks for the invitations you have provided me, Prime. Thank you as well.
Freudian slip there.
Look forward to let's all just thank each other for all the cooperation.
I'm gonna mute myself. All right.
You're good, yo.
No one talk about Prime again
for a billion years.
I'm the man who needs no introduction.
Well, yeah, you do. I'm gonna just say one quick thing. You are one of the most clutch niggas. I swear to you, I was like wondering, like, who do I get? Like, who could be here? And then I literally said out loud, I was like, oh, Pam always comes through. And then like I invited you, and you were like, yep, I could be here. And there was no time, and you've always been that nigga. I appreciate you. And it's so crazy to hear you like consider yourself to be on the left, because I've always viewed you as like so reasonable, you know. So I don't know, maybe most people weren't going to catch that. Yeah, but I sincerely appreciate you, man. I always appreciate hearing thoughts and stuff. Thank you.
No, like I said, thank you for inviting me, because like I said, I always was like, man, I want to do this, but I was like, how do I get in? And like Prime let me in, met you. I was always a big fan of Fanatiq, and kind of like I said, I love every opportunity to get to argue, because and honestly, y'all make my relationship stable. The thing is, I am an avid arguer. I love it. It makes me happy in life, and I can't do that with people who don't. Like, you can't do that with your loved ones. They don't want to argue with you all the time. So I just needed. This is where I vent. This is my playground. So yeah, I love any opportunity I get to argue. I didn't even know the topic. I was just with it. It didn't matter. Like, all right, I get to fight. I'm for it. Sure. But no, great topic.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you guys for even being able to have a conversation where there's no crazy disagreement, instead of like jumping immediately to, hey, no, oh my God, why don't we have a dissenter? Like, that's not, you can, I don't know if y'all niggas actually live in real life, but around the dinner table, sometimes you're having conversations and it's just talking and venting about things that are important to you and just kind of riffing on the topic. That's what real life is like. I just know some niggas just aren't used to that. You guys,
or like in the work world, you know, you work in an office, you all got to get along despite your varying backgrounds and different opinions.
Right.
My family dinners might be more fun. You know, I don't know. They're pretty crazy.
Yeah, my family argues, but then there's sometimes where we're all just riffing on things that we agree about, and we can have a 2-hour-long conversation. That's if the entire conversation, if the only thing you know how to do is debate, like, you're failing in life. Doobie, another amazing person who comes through for me all the freaking time. Very dependable, reliable, and not just to show up, but also to give the takes that I need and so on and so forth. I sincerely appreciate you, bro. Now I'm starting to realize this is really gross, because I gave everyone else a big intro, and now the only person I didn't give a big intro to is Zonia. I'm so sorry. Look,
Bridge burn
and me.
All right.
Yo, that's fail.
Well,
Zonia,
I'm double forgotten.
Appreciate you. Oh yeah, I didn't give Professor.
You did just
it's okay.
It's okay. What you got to say, bro?
It's
All right,
cool.
no,
it's
ahead,
okay.
Doobie.
It's okay.
Doobie, you good?
Man
What's good, Doobie?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Had a good time. Always have a good time. Pons, I think this is the first time I've spoken to. I hope you come around more. You seem like a really intelligent, reasonable person. Everybody else here is great. Love all of you. Now I'd really like to get to the open so Pisco can yell at me and call me names. So
I love you, Doobie.
Yeah, I want to find out why I was wrong about the bill too.
Yeah, I really want Pisco to like really scream at me.
Like,
Pisco, if you're in chat, I totally support the Florida bill. Okay, fuck you.
So do I.
Now, please come yell at me.
Dang, yo, Ponce, man, I feel like you should moderate. You know what I'm saying, the open panel, so I can go in.
What's good? I got it. Next panel, let's go.
All right, we're gonna figure that out.
All right, I'm gonna drop off, y'all.
Okay, Zonia, we sincerely appreciate you. Listen, we're gonna go ahead and drop out of the StreamYard, and then we're going to go to the open panel. And we're going to invite everybody else in here, but I'm going to need like a 5-minute break. You guys can continue to talk. We'll be in the same exact place. I'm just not on there. I got to get water and just get a quick bite to eat. But I'm going to leave my stream up.
Yeah, I need to drain my BBC, so I'll be right back to it.
Oh my! I hate this nigga with all my being. I hate him with all my being. I take back every good thing I said about this nigga.
Fanatic, you can't keep a good frog down, okay?
I am very upset. Yeah. We'll be back in about 5 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and continue.
I'll be sticking around, so.
And I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Prime. You're the best. What are we doing?
Yeah. So, all right. Well,
do we close this?
I mean, we can, or we just keep talking.
Yeah, we're gonna be in the Discord, but y'all can keep talking. Do whatever you want.
Yeah, one way or the other. But yeah, this has been really exciting. I hope my audience has been liking this too, because we've been having a really good time. But GB, I think you're so valuable because, like, is he still here? I'm not sure. He actually might not be still here.
He's getting his food. Frog food.
He's going, all right, never mind. I was gonna say nice things about him, but fuck that.
Nah, fuck him.
Does Doobie believe anything? I have no idea. Like, I have no idea.
Plenty of things. Most of the things he says he believes, right? Like, I had this trouble when Doobie first showed up too. I had no fucking clue what this man believed. Like, nothing. But he actually does. He has like solid
I think he loves, because that's what my thought was. Like, okay, he enjoys interesting conversations. So wherever the conversation is not like an actual reactionary, in a sense. But
Doobie's just a
no.
nature,
Everything Doobie says comes from the soul. He really does believe wholeheartedly what he says. Okay, it's all from
super contradictory.
Well, yeah, but humans are inherently contradictory. Okay, Doobie's not afraid to feel things out on the spot, and it's uncanny and off-putting.
Brave.
People shouldn't be trans, but trans women should be in women's prisons. But I don't know. It was like,
hey, you know what? Nick Fuentes is married to a Jewish person. Okay, we live in a world where people don't know what the fuck they believe. People don't care. Okay.
Seriously, is he married to a Jewish person?
Yes.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
I feel like that feels really for the clout, but who knows? Actually, let me not say
speaking
that.
Speaking of Doobie, Doobie, could you send me, unironically, actually, could you send me that study you were looking at? About you were talking about the one about
the gender,
sorry, the homosexuality, the 25% or whatever.
Yeah,
that study.
Well, yeah, I guess so too.
I'm glad I got to give my opinion on that, because I feel like that's what I said was a really uncomfortable thing to say, and I'm glad we got to go through a little bit of a dialogue on it. Of like, is there some truth to like, is there some element of I don't like choice. Choice is a terrible word to describe the phenomenon, but like, is there some sort of social phenomenon with sexuality? And like I said, we didn't come to a hard answer. We don't know the truth, but like,
well, there is definitely socialization is weird. I feel like that's almost a loaded term. I would say environmental. Like if we load it to that, and I'll be honest, I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't research this specifically more beforehand. I definitely meant to, and as soon as Doobie started talking about it, I was like, oh shit, wait. But as far as I understand, environmental, definitely. The degree to which that's the case, it seems to be pretty limited to a certain degree. Like there are certain things we can do that absolutely will increase like homosexuality, but whether or not that's like really specific things that we would like. For example, like having, I think there was some studies that showed that like having like a like during development having homosexual experiences, there was some evidence that it might increase, and it wasn't even necessarily that solid. But like even if like when things like this are the most solid indicators I can find, I just feel like it paints a picture of like, okay, there's obviously some point at which this seems to be a little bit environmental, but like, is it environmental enough for us to call it like, you know what I mean? I guess that was the distinction I was maybe trying and not necessarily succeeding at making.
Yeah, I had a friend. The reason I came because it was actually my friend who brought this to me, because I was like, because we used to always say like, oh, you're born this way, you're born this way, you're born this way. And I had a friend who back in elementary school, like this is obviously like late elementary school, but we used to talk about girls, things like that kids do. Like you're around that age, these things come up. And then later he came out as gay, and I was like, oh, okay. So like, were you like hiding? Were you lying the whole time? Like, and not like in a way that was like trying to press him, but like actually curious. Like, oh, did you really feel this way? You didn't, like feel like you were gay? You felt like you had to do that to fit in? And he was like, maybe that was some of the element, but he said he actually like at the time he actually thought like girls were kind of cool, but then he got older. He did some deeper diving.
He realized girls are not cool. No.
Well, yeah, he was like, you know what? But he was legit. He was like, oh yeah, I was like, so you weren't born that way? He was like, were you born straight? And I was like, Maybe not. I mean, I don't. There was a time I thought actually it was a long period of childhood where like it's He-Man woman hater, girls are gross. Like it's the boys for life. And then like you go out there, so like that's why I'm saying like I don't think that sexuality is necessary something like
society lies to you. Well, you were right the first time. Like Fanatiq, are you back?
I think he's going to. So are we using StreamYard's Fanatiq?
Yeah,
or are we using,
Discord.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does StreamYard?
I can drop out.
I'll drop out of here.
You got to drop out, nigga. You can still be in.
No, I'm here.
No,
but I'm talking
so we
about
can
like
turn on the camera.